Hey there, and welcome back. If you are settling in tonight, getting comfortable, letting the day fall away from you, good. Tonight's story is one of those that asks for a particular kind of stillness, not because anything dramatic happens in it. Almost nothing dramatic happens in it. But because the people we are going to spend the evening with are about to lose almost everything, and they do not know it yet. And the only way to do justice to the evening they had is to be very quiet inside it with them. The date is Friday, the 24th of July, 1914. The setting is a country house in Hampshire, in the chalk valley of the River Itchen, somewhere south of Winchester. The family is called Ashcombe. They are not famous. They are not aristocratic in the great sense. They are an old county family with a baronetcy, a substantial house, a few thousand acres, and a quietly conservative position in their corner of the world. They are eating dinner. The light is still in the sky. Their elder son in uniform is laughing at something his sister has just said. Their younger son is half listening, half reading the cricket scores. Their parents are at opposite ends of the table and exchange a private smile. The butler is bringing in the next course. What none of them know, and what we know, is that this is one of the last peaceful evenings of their lives, and peaceful evenings of an entire civilization. In 10 days, on the 4th of August, Britain will declare war on Germany. Within 4 weeks, their elder son's regiment will be in France. Within 4 months, half the young men he is currently in the army with will be dead. A household of 23 indoor and outdoor staff that supports their evening tonight will be permanently broken inside a generation. The world they are sitting comfortably inside, this exact warm summer evening with the windows open and the smell of the roses coming in from the terrace, is in its final week. The Ashcombes do not know any of this. They have read the morning's Times, which has carried the news that the Austro-Hungarian government delivered an ultimatum to Serbia yesterday evening over the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand 4 weeks ago. They have noticed it. The papers are talking about it. But it is, to them, a Balkan story. A distant crisis in a part of Europe that has been having distant crises for a generation. They are far more concerned this morning with the news that the Buckingham Palace Conference on Irish Home Rule has just broken up without agreement. The Irish question, in late July of 1914, is what the educated English political class is genuinely worried about. The Balkans, by contrast, are a long way away. They have ridden out all afternoon in the conviction that the summer will be normal. There is Goodwood next week. There is Cowes the week after. There is the wedding being planned for September. Their elder son's leave runs to the 8th of August. After that, he is meant to be back with his battalion at Aldershot. None of these plans will survive. But that is the framing. And that is all the framing the script is going to do in that direct way. From here on, we are going to step inside the evening they had, and we are going to stay inside it. We are not going to keep telling you what is coming. The evening itself, in its perfect ordinariness, is what is worth being inside. The dramatic weight of what is coming will sit just outside the windows, in the soft summer dusk, and it will reach you on its own without any help from me. So set the war aside. They have. Let your shoulders drop. The light is still in the western sky. The sun set perhaps half an hour ago, and the long English summer twilight is just beginning. The kind of twilight that, in southern England in late July, lasts almost an hour and turns the air pale silver before it darkens. The French windows of the dining room are open onto the terrace. There is no breeze. The candles on the table do not flicker. From somewhere in the village, a quarter of a mile away, comes the distant sound of a bell from the parish church, ringing for evening service. And then it stops, and the only sounds are the sounds of the house. The chink of silver on china, the low voices, the footman's quiet steps on the parquet as he carries plates, a wood pigeon in the garden, settling for the night. This is the world we are going to be inside for the next several hours. This is the evening. The English country house in 1914 is at the end of a particular kind of golden afternoon. It has been at this end for some time. The agricultural depression of the 1870s and 80s had broken the back of the older, simpler country house economy, the one that had sustained the great estates through the 18th and early 19th centuries. The repeal of the Corn Laws in 1846, then the flood of cheap American grain in the 1870s and 80s, then the slow erosion of agricultural land values had left many great estates losing money on their farms by the 1890s and were quietly cross-subsidized by other forms of income. The Ashcombs are in the comfortable position of also having industrial money behind them, from a great-grandfather who had married well and had the sense to invest in railways at the right moment. So they have not been hurt, the way many of their neighbours have. The house is still kept up, the gardens are still gardened, the horses are still in the stables. There is a chauffeur, a recent addition, alongside the coachman, who is now becoming a slightly archaic figure. There are 23 indoor and outdoor staff. The household, on the surface, is in full Edwardian flower, but Edwardian, by 1914, is already a slightly inaccurate word. King Edward VII died 4 years ago, in May of 1910, and the throne is now held by his son, George V, a more reserved and less colourful monarch who has set a quieter tone for the court and the country. The high social brilliance that the press associated with Edward, the long house parties, the flamboyant hostesses, the famous mistresses, the Marlborough house set, has cooled noticeably. King George prefers stamps and shooting to society. The Edwardian period proper has, in this sense, ended. But the rhythms of country house life have not yet caught up. People still speak of the season, still spend May and June and most of July in London, still come down to the country for the late summer, still organise their year around the same sequence of cricket weeks and regattas and house parties and shooting parties that had organised the year for their parents and grandparents. The pattern is still there, even if the king at the top of it has changed. The summer of 1914, in particular, is one that will be remembered by everyone who lived through it, in retrospect, as exceptionally beautiful. The weather has been remarkable for weeks. Long, warm days, almost no rain, blue skies, the gardens at their best, the cricket fields in perfect condition. The London season just ending has been brilliant. Lavinia Ashcombe, the elder daughter, was presented at court in early May at one of the last great pre-war drawing rooms, in a white dress with the regulation ostrich feathers in her hair, and has been to a remarkable number of parties since. The papers have called the season the most successful in years. The Royal Garden Party at Buckingham Palace earlier in July was attended by 12,000 people. Henley Regatta in early July drew the largest crowd anyone could remember. Eton beat Harrow at Lord's by 194 runs in front of a vast and elegant audience. Wimbledon was won by Norman Brooks, the Australian. Goodwood, which begins in 3 days, will go ahead as normal. Cowes Week, which begins on the 3rd of August, has been planned in detail by everyone in the yachting world. In retrospect, all of this acquired, very quickly, the quality of dream. The phrase that came to be used for the summer of 1914 in countless memoirs was the long Edwardian afternoon, even though the Edwardian period had technically ended. People remembered this summer as the moment of greatest sweetness before the fall, the last summer of an old world. Some of that, of course, was retrospective sentimentality. Real Edwardian England had its slums, its labour disputes, its suffragette protests, its Irish crisis, its cold-eyed colonial wars. But for people of the Ashcombs class, for the gentry and the upper middle and the comfortable professional families across southern England, the summer of 1914 had a particular golden quality that they remembered for the rest of their lives. The roses had never been better. The cricket had never been finer. The young men had never seemed more handsome and more certain of their futures. And then we are going to leave the "and then" alone. We are going to stay in the rose garden, where the bees are working the late blooms in the dusk, and where Lady Ashcomb's gardener has been watering the borders against the dry July heat. We are going to stay on the terrace, where in an hour the candles will be brought out into the still air, and the family will sit listening to the river beyond the lawn. We are going to stay in the dining room, where the meal is still in progress, and the talk is unhurried. The summer they were inside that evening was real. They were genuinely happy in it. They had no reason yet not to be. The honesty of the script is to take their summer at the value they themselves placed on it, and to spend the next several hours inside it on its own terms, not on the terms of the catastrophe waiting outside the gates. Let me tell you about the family. Sir Edward Ashcombe is 55 years old. He is the third baronet of his line, his grandfather having been made one of the new baronets of Queen Victoria's middle reign for services to the agricultural interest in the House of Commons. He himself sat as a Conservative member for one of the Hampshire county divisions for 15 years, retiring at the last general election in December of 1910 because the work no longer interested him in the way it once had. He took a first in classics at Trinity, Cambridge, in his youth, was called to the bar but never practised, and has spent his adult life as a country gentleman with a moderate interest in public affairs. He is on the bench as a magistrate. He is a church warden of the parish church. He chairs the board of governors of the local grammar school. He is, in short, exactly the kind of figure who held English county society together in the long Edwardian afternoon, and who is about to find that the world he has spent his life maintaining is no longer there to be maintained. Tonight he is wearing evening dress, the white tie and tails that the country house dinner of this period still required even when no guests were present. His hair is grey, more grey than it was a year ago, and his moustache, which he has worn in some form since his army days as a young man, is now full and white. He is still upright, still vigorous for his age, still rides 3 or 4 times a week. But he has slowed slightly, and he knows it. He is reading a letter, just before sitting down to dinner, that has come from his agent regarding a tenant dispute on one of the home farms. He folds it, puts it in his pocket, and gives his attention to the evening. Lady Ashcombe, his wife, is 51. She was Margaret Vavasour before her marriage, the youngest daughter of a Yorkshire baronetcy. They were married in 1885 after a courtship of 18 months. They have, by the standards of their class and their time, been happy. They have raised 4 children together, 3 of whom are downstairs in the house tonight, and one of whom, the second daughter, is married and lives in Sussex with 2 children of her own. Lady Ashcombe is gentle, quiet, attentive to detail. She runs the house with a light hand, her butler and her housekeeper between them doing most of the real work. She gardens seriously. She paints in watercolours indifferently. She sings tolerably well. She is good with the village. She knows every cottager on the estate by name. She has, over the past 3 weeks, been worrying privately about a persistent ache in her left side that she has not yet mentioned to her husband. It will turn out to be nothing. She does not yet know that. Captain Edmund Ashcombe is 26. He is the eldest son and heir, a tall, fair young man with his father's quiet manner and his mother's sensitivity to atmosphere. He went to Eton, then Sandhurst, then took his commission in the Coldstream Guards 5 years ago. He is currently on 3 weeks' leave from his battalion, which is stationed at Wellington Barracks in London. He had been at Henley earlier in the month, then up at the family's place in Yorkshire for the start of the grouse shooting on the 12th, then back here a week ago for the rest of his leave. He is engaged to be married to a girl called Hermione Standish, the daughter of a London barrister, whom he met at his sister Caroline's wedding 2 years ago, and who he has been quietly pursuing ever since. The wedding is set for the 18th of September. The plans are well advanced. His mother has been organising the marquee, the caterers, the flowers, the seating arrangements. He is a young man with everything ahead of him, in love, in the regiment of his choice, on leave in his family home in the most beautiful summer, in living memory. He has perhaps 2 more weeks before his world ends. Hugh Ashcombe is 22. He is the second son. He came down from Magdalen College, Oxford, last month, having taken a 3rd in modern history, having spent considerably more of his time at Oxford on the river and at the Union than in the libraries, but having been popular and admired and remembered fondly by his contemporaries, he intends, vaguely, to read for the bar in the autumn, although he is in no particular hurry, and his father has not pressed him. He is darker than his elder brother, sharper, more verbal, more given to quick judgments. He plays the piano with real feeling but no discipline. He reads novels constantly. He has, his sister says, the makings of a writer if he ever decided to take it seriously. He has not so far decided. Tonight he is in evening dress, less perfectly turned out than his brother, his hair slightly too long, his white tie slightly off-centre, the effect somehow not careless but characterful. He is, of all the family, the one who has been most engaged with the news from Europe in the morning's papers. He thinks, although he has not said so, that there is going to be a war, and quite a serious one. He is wrong about the timing. He has it as something coming in the autumn. It is coming in 10 days. Lavinia Ashcombe is 19. She was presented at court at the May drawing room. She has been in London for the season, staying with her aunt in Belgrave Square, and has been to more parties in the past 3 months than she had been to in her previous 19 years combined. She has been written about mildly in the society papers. She has had 2 proposals, both of which she has declined, and is now home for the summer, mildly fatigued, more thoughtful than her family is used to her being, and quite unsure whether she enjoyed the season or not. She is wearing a pale dress in the new straighter line that has been replacing the more elaborate Edwardian silhouette. Her hair is up, but loosely. She is the only person at the table who has not yet entirely settled into the evening. There is something on her mind. She is keeping it to herself. Beatrice Ashcombe is 12. She is the youngest child. She has been excused from coming down to dinner tonight, on the grounds of having had a headache earlier, and is upstairs in the schoolroom with her governess, Miss Tyrrell, eating a light supper of cold chicken and a biscuit before going to bed at 9. She knows none of what is coming. None of them do. But Beatrice will, of all of them, live through the most of the 20th century. She will be alive in 1985. She will see the world we are now in coming into being, slowly, across 7 decades. She is upstairs, brushing her hair, 12 years old, with most of the century in front of her. That is the family at the table, and the child upstairs. Now let me take you through the house. Ashcombe Park, as the place is called, sits in a shallow chalk valley about 4 miles south of Winchester, with the River Itchen running through the grounds at the bottom of the lawn. The house was begun in the 1740s by Sir Edward's great-great-grandfather, who pulled down a smaller Tudor house on the same site and replaced it with a square Palladian block of 2.5 stories with a hipped roof and a central pediment. It was extended in the 1820s when a wing was added at one end to provide an enlarged drawing room and a library above, and again in the 1880s when the present Sir Edward's father added a service wing at the back to accommodate the larger Victorian household. The result is a comfortable composite house, mostly classical in its main lines, slightly meandering in its services, set in about 100 acres of park and gardens, with a further 3,000 acres of farmland and woodland beyond. It is built of brick with a stone dressing, the brick a soft orange-red of the kind made locally in the Hampshire kilns, the stone a pale Bath stone brought up by canal in the 18th century when the original house was built. The roof is grey slate, replaced 30 years ago, with 8 tall chimneys rising above it. The front of the house faces south, looking down the lawn toward the river. There is a gravel sweep in front of the door, where the carriages and now the motor cars draw up. The front door is 6-panelled, painted dark green, set under a stone porch with 2 Doric columns. There are 3 stories of windows above it. To the right of the porch are the windows of the drawing room. To the left, the windows of the library. Above, the windows of the principal bedrooms. Above those, set into the slope of the roof, the dormer windows of the servants' rooms. This is a different kind of house from a London townhouse, and the difference is worth thinking about, because it shapes everything that happens inside it. A London townhouse, of the kind that a comparable family might also keep, is vertical, 5 or 6 stories narrow and deep, with rooms stacked one above another, and a single staircase running up the centre of the building. A country house is horizontal. The principal rooms are arranged on a single floor, mostly the ground floor and the principal first floor, and they open into each other in a sequence. Reception rooms run into one another. The hall opens onto the drawing room, which opens onto the library, smoking room, which opens back through to the dining room. You can move through the house at the level of the main floor without using the stairs at all. The vertical stratification of the London house, family in the middle and servants above and below, is replaced in the country house by a horizontal stratification. The servants' working rooms are not above or below. They are on the same floors, but in a separate wing. Behind a green baize door at the back of the entrance hall, a long corridor leads away into a different world. The kitchen, the scullery, the larder, the still room, the housekeeper's room, the butler's pantry, the servants' hall, the back stairs, all of it laid out on the ground floor of the service wing, with the servants' bedrooms above on the first and second floors of the same wing. The family does not go through the green baize door. The servants do not come through it without reason. The household is divided horizontally, with the green baize door as the membrane between 2 worlds. This horizontal arrangement is one of the things that makes the country house feel quite different from the London townhouse. There is more space. There is more room for the household to spread out, to occupy different rooms simultaneously, to be private from each other within the same building. There is also a closer relationship between the house and the outside. The drawing room of a country house gives onto a terrace, and the terrace gives onto a lawn, and the lawn rolls down to a river, or a ha-ha, or a meadow. The house is a part of the landscape it sits in. A London drawing room gives onto a London street, with its noise and its strangers and its general world. A country drawing room gives onto its own world, the family's own park, owned and shaped by them across generations, framed for them through the windows like a painting they have made. We are going to spend most of our time tonight in the principal rooms of the south front. Let me walk you through the layout of the ground floor before we settle into it. You enter, as a visitor would, through the front door into the entrance hall. The hall is large by London standards, perhaps 30 feet square, paved in black and white marble, with a stone fireplace that is currently not lit, the summer being too warm. There is a long case clock by Tompion in one corner, a barometer of the kind that no Edwardian country house would be without, a hat stand, a oak chest where outdoor things are kept, and a baize door at the back leading to the servants' wing. To the left of the hall, double doors lead into the library. To the right, double doors lead into the drawing room. Straight ahead, beyond the staircase that rises from the hall, a passage leads to the dining room at the back of the house. The staircase itself is of dark mahogany, polished, with carved newel posts, rising in a single broad flight to a half landing and then turning to the first floor. A portrait of Sir Edward's grandfather looks down from the half landing wall, the second baronet, a handsome man in the dress of the early 19th century. The drawing room, which is where the family will spend most of the evening once they leave the dining room, is the principal reception room of the house. It is 40 feet long and 20 feet wide, with 3 tall windows facing south onto the terrace and the lawn beyond. It has a high ceiling, perhaps 16 feet, with delicate plasterwork from the original 1740s building, a marble fireplace on the inner wall, and a second pair of doors at the far end leading through to the library, so that for large parties the 2 rooms can be opened up into one continuous space of nearly 80 feet in length. The walls are papered in a pale grey-green silk damask, faded in places by sunlight, and hung with family portraits and 1 or 2 landscapes by minor English masters. The library is more masculine, more enclosed, lined with books to the ceiling on 3 walls, with a heavy desk in one corner where Sir Edward writes his letters and does the work of the estate, and a pair of leather chairs and a sofa drawn up in front of the fireplace. The fireplace here is currently lit, very low, more for the look of the thing than for warmth. The smell of the room is of leather and old paper, and a faint pipe smoke that has accumulated over generations. The dining room is at the back of the house, with windows giving onto a private garden enclosed by yew hedges. It is 45 feet long, panelled in dark mahogany, with a long mahogany table that can be extended to seat 24 when the family entertains, and which tonight is set for 5 at one end. There is a sideboard of considerable size against one wall, with the family silver laid out on it. There is a portrait of Sir Edward at the age of 40 over the mantel, painted when he was still in the Commons. The chandelier above the table is one of the new electric ones, installed by the present Sir Edward in 1908, when the house was wired throughout, and it is the first thing that tells you, walking into the dining room, that you are in 1914 and not 1814. The light from the chandelier is steady and slightly white. The candles on the table are also lit, but they are now decorative rather than functional. a survival of the older lighting tradition kept for the look of it. The smoking room, smaller, more comfortable, more cluttered with sporting prints and cigar boxes and copies of Punch and Country Life, lies between the library and the dining room. The morning room, where Lady Ashcombe deals with her correspondence and conducts the business of the household with her butler and housekeeper, is on the east side of the house, with a view of the rose garden, and is currently empty. Above, on the first floor, are the principal bedrooms. Sir Edward's and Lady Ashcombe's bedrooms, connected through a shared dressing room. Edmund's bedroom, which has been his since boyhood. Hugh's bedroom. Lavinia's bedroom. Several guest bedrooms. A sitting room used by Lady Ashcombe in the morning. On the second floor, more bedrooms. The schoolroom where Beatrice is now finishing her supper. Miss Tyrrell's bedroom, and one or two further guest rooms. On the floor above that, in the attic under the slope of the roof, the bedrooms of the female indoor servants. The men sleep in a separate part of the service wing. Outside, beyond the south terrace, the lawn rolls down for perhaps 200 yards to a ha-ha, a deep ditch invisible from the house but designed to keep the cattle from the park out of the formal gardens, and beyond the ha-ha to the river. To the east, the rose garden, walled, with espaliered fruit trees on the south wall, and currently in its July glory. To the west, the kitchen garden, also walled, half an acre of vegetables and soft fruit, the pride of the head gardener. Beyond the kitchen garden, the stables. Beyond the stables, the new motor garage built 5 years ago for Sir Edward's Daimler. Beyond that, the home farm, the dairy, the laundry, the gamekeeper's cottage, and the estate yard where the carpenter and the wheelwright have their workshops. This is the world of the house. It is a kingdom. It is largely self-sufficient. It produces almost all of its own food, milk and butter and eggs, vegetables and most of its own fruit, all of its own meat. It cuts its own firewood from its own woods, makes its own ice from its own ponds in winter, and stores it in its own ice house, brews its own beer for the servants' hall. It has its own water supply from its own springs, gravity fed to the house through pipes laid 40 years ago. It has its own electricity, since 1908, generated by a dynamo in the engine room behind the stables. It has its own laundry, where 2 maids spend most of every Monday and Tuesday washing the household's linen. It has, for that matter, almost its own population, with 23 indoor and outdoor staff, plus their families in the village, plus the tenants and labourers of the home farm, plus the village of Ashcombe St. Mary itself, which sits half a mile down the road and which is in one sense an extension of the estate, a great many of its inhabitants either working for the family directly or holding their cottages from them as tenants. This is the social fact of the country house in 1914, and it is one of the things that will be gone in 20 years and almost incomprehensible in 50. The country house was not just a building, it was the centre of a community, the principal employer in its district, the largest single household in its parish, the social and economic anchor of a way of life that had organised rural England for several centuries. The Ashcombes are not, in any sense, exceptional. There are perhaps 1,000 houses of this size and this kind across England in 1914, each of them the centre of their own kingdom, each of them functioning more or less as Ashcombe Park functions. The whole network is about to undergo the most catastrophic single shock in its history, from which it will not recover. But that is not the evening. The evening is the dinner table, the candlelight and the new electric chandelier, the faint sound of the river beyond the lawn, the family quietly talking, the long Hampshire dusk softening into night beyond the open French windows. Let me take you back inside. But before I do, I want to step back briefly from the dinner itself and tell you what kind of day it was that has just ended. Because the evening sits at the close of a particular Friday in late July, and the texture of that day is part of the texture of the evening, and the Hampshire country house in high summer has its own slow shape that the evening grows out of. Let me take you through the day. The household had risen that morning at the usual hours. The kitchen staff were up first, as always, Mrs. Caverley and the kitchen maids and the scullery maid Maud all on their feet by 5:30. The kitchen range had been brought back up to full heat by 6. The first kettles were singing by 20 past. By 6:45, the first cup of tea of the day was on its way up the back stairs, carried by Sarah, the head housemaid, who took it through to Mr. Pemberton in his room near Sir Edward's dressing room. Mr. Pemberton woke his master at 7, with the cup of tea on a silver tray and a quiet good morning. Sir Edward, who was a regular early riser by long habit, drank his tea, washed in the hot water that had been brought up by Annie, the second housemaid, dressed in his country clothes, and was downstairs in the morning room by 8:20 to read his post and look at the morning's papers, which had come up from London on the early train and been brought from Winchester station to the house by the chauffeur, Mr. Maddox. The morning paper, which was the Times, lay folded on Sir Edward's chair. He opened it. The leading article that morning was about the Buckingham Palace Conference on the Irish Home Rule crisis, which had broken up the previous afternoon without an agreement, and which the Times leader writer regarded as a most serious failure of British politics. There was a substantial inside story about the Austrian ultimatum to Serbia, which had been delivered the previous evening with a deadline of 6 o'clock on Saturday. The story was given prominent treatment, but was not on the front page, the front page being given over to advertisements, as was the Times's custom of the period. There was a piece about the test match against South Africa at Lord's, which had ended in a draw. There was a long dispatch from Paris about the trial of Madame Caillot, the wife of a French politician who had shot the editor of Le Figaro in March, and whose acquittal 3 days earlier had been a major story across Europe. There was the cricket. Sir Edward read the paper for 40 minutes, methodically, going through it from front to back as he always did. He drank a second cup of tea. He made notes on a piece of paper of items he wanted to mention to his wife at breakfast. Lady Ashcombe came down at 9. The family breakfast at Ashcombe Park was served between 8:30 and 10 in the dining room, which was set up as a buffet on the sideboard, with hot dishes kept in silver chafing dishes, eggs and bacon, kippers, devilled kidneys, a kedgeree of rice and smoked haddock, hot rolls, toast, marmalade, butter, fruit, 2 kinds of jam from the still room, tea and coffee. The diners came down at their own hours and helped themselves from the sideboard, sitting wherever they wished at the table. There was no formal seating at breakfast. It was the most relaxed meal of the country house day. The papers were on the side table for anyone to read. Conversation was light. Plans for the day were mentioned. Sir Edward had said he would be on the home farm for most of the morning. Lady Ashcombe had said she would visit 2 cottages in the village before lunch. Edmund had said he was going to walk down to the river and see how the trout were running. Hugh had said he was going to read in the library and would not be available before lunch. Lavinia had said she would help her mother in the rose garden later in the morning. Beatrice and Miss Tyrrell, who had had their breakfast in the schoolroom upstairs, were, as the family understood from past experience, at lessons in French until 11, and then would be free to go and play in the garden until lunch. The morning at Ashcombe Park in late July has a particular character. The sun comes up early, before 5, and is well up by the time the family are at breakfast. The light through the south-facing windows of the dining room is bright and clear. The lawn glistens with the dew that the early sun has not yet quite burned off. The roses in the rose garden, half visible from the morning room, are at their richest in the morning, before the heat of the day pulls some of the colour out of them. The sounds of the morning are the sounds of birds, of the gardener's tools at work in the borders below the terrace, of the occasional carriage passing on the road that leads from the village to the house, of the cattle in the park lowing for their milking, which happens twice daily at the home farm. There is a particular hush of the morning in a country house in summer that you do not get at any other time of year. The day stretches ahead. The work has not yet imposed itself. The family scatters to its various morning occupations. Sir Edward, after breakfast, went out to the home farm with the agent, a man called Hodges, to look at a barn that needed some structural repair before the autumn. They were out for 2 hours, walking the farm and discussing the business of estate management. There were 3 fields of wheat to be harvested in 3 weeks' time. The hay had been brought in successfully in early July. There was a tenant in one of the cottages who was having trouble paying his rent, and the question of whether to extend him a forbearance was, for Sir Edward, a matter requiring some thought. The home farm dairy had reported a problem with one of its cows. The new horse-drawn binding machine that had been bought in May was working well. The agent reported all of this in his careful, detailed way as they walked. Sir Edward listened. He made decisions. He authorised the expenditure on the barn repair. He asked the agent to write to the difficult tenant offering a 6-month forbearance. He asked about the hop garden at the south end of the estate, which was beginning to look unhealthy and which the agent said would need professional attention. The morning's work was the regular work of running an estate, conducted in the unhurried manner of 2 men who knew each other well and who had been doing this work together for many years. Lady Ashcombe, at 9:45, walked down to the village with her secretary, a young woman called Miss Cope, who came up from the village 3 days a week to help with the mistress's correspondence and parish work. They visited 2 cottages, taking with them parcels of good things from the kitchen. The first was old Mrs. Carter, whose new baby had been born a fortnight ago, and who needed nothing from the great house but who was glad of the visit. Lady Ashcombe sat with her for 40 minutes, talked about the baby and the older children, asked after Mr. Carter, who worked in the home farm dairy, listened to a long story about the difficulty of getting the older children to school, made encouraging noises, and left a parcel containing a baby gown that Lady Ashcombe had made herself and a jar of the still-room strawberry jam. The second visit was to Mr. Wheeler, who was elderly and ill, and was unlikely to last the summer. Mrs. Wheeler met Lady Ashcombe at the door, took her into the parlour, gave her tea, and sat with her for half an hour, talking about her husband's condition, which was no better. Lady Ashcombe had brought a bottle of port for Mr. Wheeler, and a piece of lace for Mrs. Wheeler, and a copy of a religious tract that Mrs. Wheeler liked. The conversation between the 2 women was easy, slow, friendly. Lady Ashcombe knew Mrs. Wheeler well. Mrs. Wheeler had worked at the great house as a housemaid in her youth before her marriage. There was a long understanding between them that had outlasted the change in their stations. This, the morning round of cottage visits, was one of the things that the Edwardian lady of a country house considered her absolute duty. It was not, in the modern sense, social work. It was something between social work and parish charity, and the maintenance of an old set of relationships between the great house and the village that depended on it. Lady Ashcombe knew every cottager on the estate by name. She knew their children, their illnesses, their triumphs, and their troubles. She knew when a cottage roof needed mending, when a husband was drinking too much, when a daughter had been taken into service somewhere and was doing well or not so well. The information flowed through her in steady streams. She was, in this sense, the social heart of the village, in a way that her husband, who handled the formal business of the estate, was not. She was back at the house by 12, having walked back at her usual unhurried pace. She had had a headache by the time she reached the front door and had gone up to her room to lie down for half an hour before lunch. Edmund had been at the river since 10. The Itchen, which runs through the south end of the park, is one of the famous chalk streams of southern England, a slow, clear river that holds large brown trout and runs over white chalk gravel with extensive water meadows on its banks. The fishing on the Ashcombe stretch was reserved to the family and a number of friends. Edmund, who was a serious fisherman in the dry fly tradition that Halford and the Hampshire school had perfected over the past 40 years, had been working a particular pool below the bridge for an hour and a half. He had caught nothing. The trout, which had been rising freely the previous evening, were not interested in the olive flies that Edmund had been offering them. He sat for some time on the bank, watching the water, smoking a pipe. He moved up the river to a different pool. He tried a different fly. Eventually, just before noon, he caught a fish, a brown trout of perhaps 1.25 pounds, which he killed quickly and laid in his creel. He continued for another 20 minutes. He caught nothing else. He walked back up the lawn to the house. Satisfied, his rod over his shoulder, the fish in his creel. The fish would be the cook's lunch, given to Mrs. Caverley to dispose of as she saw fit. The simple fact of the morning's fishing, of the hour and a half on the bank with the slow river going by, was what he had wanted from the morning. The fish was almost incidental. He was now walking back up the lawn in a state of mild, quiet contentment that was his particular reward for the morning's work. Hugh had stayed in the library all morning. He had been reading, with intermittent attention, a recent novel by Joseph Conrad, who was beginning by 1914 to be recognised as one of the major figures of contemporary English fiction. The book was Chance, which Conrad had published the previous year, and which Hugh had been working through with the kind of slightly puzzled admiration that intelligent young readers felt for Conrad in this period. The prose was difficult. The structure was complex. The book was not exactly a pleasure to read. But there was something in it that Hugh recognised as serious in a way that other contemporary novels were not. He read for 2 hours. He took down a volume of Henry James from the shelf and read a chapter. He returned to the Conrad. He looked out the library window at the lawn for a while. He went and got himself a glass of barley water from the dining room sideboard. He returned to the library. He was not, in any productive sense, accomplishing anything that morning. He was, in another sense, doing exactly what he wanted to be doing, which was reading slowly and seriously in his father's library on a summer morning at home. Lavinia, after her mother went down to the village, had gone out into the rose garden by herself. The rose garden at Ashcombe Park, walled and warmed, planted by Lady Ashcombe over 20 years to her own design, was at its absolute peak in the last week of July. There were perhaps 200 bushes, in a mixture of the old roses and the newer hybrids that had begun to be available in the previous decade. The scents in the morning, after the dew had lifted but before the heat of the day, were extraordinary. Lavinia, who had grown up with the rose garden and who had helped her mother plan and replant sections of it as she had grown older, walked through it slowly with a basket and a pair of secateurs, cutting blooms for the house. She cut perhaps 30 blooms across an hour. mostly the larger old garden roses that her mother liked for the drawing room, with a few of the deep crimsons that she preferred herself for her own bedroom. The cutting was slow. She was paying attention. She brought the cut roses back to the still room, where Mrs. Burgess and the under-housemaid Lily were preparing them for the various rooms. The still room is the room in the service wing where the household's preserves and cordials are made. The herbs are dried, the flower arrangements are prepared, the handcrafts of the household are conducted. It smells, all year round, of the things that have been made there. In late July it smelled of strawberry jam being made on the kitchen range next door, of new lavender being stripped from its stems and tied into bundles, of the cut roses themselves, of the hot wax that Mrs. Burgess had been using to seal preserve jars earlier in the morning. Lavinia laid the cut roses on the still room table. Mrs. Burgess admired them. The under-housemaid was sent to fetch the various vases that the roses would be arranged into. The arrangement itself was done jointly, Mrs. Burgess and Lavinia working at the table, Lavinia learning, even at 19, the details of how a cut rose is to be conditioned and arranged for the longest possible life in the rooms of the house. By 12:30, all the various morning occupations were drawing to their close. Sir Edward had returned from the home farm. Edmund had come back from the river. Hugh had emerged from the library. Lady Ashcombe had come down from her room. Lavinia had finished with the roses. They gathered in the dining room for lunch. Lunch in an Edwardian country house was a substantial midday meal, lighter than dinner but considerably more substantial than the modern lunch. There were 2 courses, sometimes 3. Today there was a cold soup of cucumbers, then a salmon mayonnaise made with the leftovers of last night's poached salmon, then cold beef and ham with various pickles and a green salad, then a strawberry tart with cream. The wine was a single hock, a different one from the one served at dinner, a slightly lighter style. Lunch was less formal than dinner. The conversation was practical. Plans for the afternoon were discussed. Sir Edward was going to write some letters in the library and then sleep for half an hour after lunch, which he had begun, as he approached 60, to allow himself. Lady Ashcombe was going to lie down for an hour, her morning headache having returned. Edmund was going to drive into Winchester in the new motor car with Hugh to do some errands and to call on a friend at the cathedral close. Lavinia was going to play tennis with Miss Tyrrell, the governess, who was a surprisingly good player, on the lawn tennis court at the far side of the garden. Beatrice was going to be allowed to go down to the river with the gamekeeper's daughter, who was her closest friend in the village. Lunch lasted about an hour. The family scattered. The afternoon passed in its various unhurried ways. The motor car came back from Winchester at about 5:15, with Edmund driving and Hugh in the passenger seat. The lawn tennis match had been won by Miss Tyrrell, who had taken 3 sets to Lavinia's 1. Beatrice had returned from the river with the gamekeeper's daughter, somewhat damp, having waded too deep. Sir Edward had had his sleep, and had then written 4 letters of business at his desk in the library. Lady Ashcombe had rested and felt better. By 6, the family was beginning to gather in the drawing room before the long pre-dinner ritual of dressing for the evening. Tea had been served at 4:30. The family had taken it on the terrace, in the warm late afternoon sun, with cucumber sandwiches and slices of fruit cake and ginger biscuits. The tea had been at the round white-painted iron table that lived on the terrace through the summer, with the white wicker chairs around it, with Lady Ashcombe pouring as she always did, with the conversation easy and the day still ahead of them. The afternoon had been, in its unhurried way, perfect. Hampshire summer, a country house on a Friday in July, the cricket match tomorrow, the friends arriving on the afternoon train, plans for the weekend that nobody knew was the last weekend of the world they had grown up in. By 6:30, the family had gone up to dress for dinner. The dressing for dinner is one of the things that has gone, in our world, that was utterly central to theirs. The whole household, family and senior servants alike, took a full hour for the transition between the day clothes and the evening dress. Sir Edward, with Mr. Pemberton's help, changed into white tie and tails. Lady Ashcombe, with Miss Howard, changed into a dinner gown of pale grey silk. Lavinia, with Miss Howard's help, changed into a younger woman's evening dress, simpler than her mother's but cut on the new straighter line. Edmund and Hugh changed into white tie themselves, with the assistance of William and Thomas the footman. The whole household took on, between 6:30 and 7:30, the particular dressed-up quality that distinguished the country house evening from the day. By the time the family came down at 7:20 for sherry in the drawing-room before dinner, they were entirely transformed from the people who had been in their day clothes an hour earlier. Sir Edward was in his white tie. Edmund was in his brigade evening dress, the regimental version of formal wear that the Coldstream Guards wore at mess. Hugh was in his less perfectly assembled white tie. Lady Ashcombe and Lavinia were in their evening gowns with their evening jewellery, their hair done up by Miss Howard. They looked, all five of them, like the formal photographic portraits of an Edwardian family. This was the day that ended in the dinner we have just walked through. A long quiet day in a Hampshire country house, with its various separate occupations of the various members of the family and the household, all conducted in the unhurried manner that the country house in 1914 still considered the natural pattern of life. None of this is in itself remarkable. Houses like Ashcombe Park, in their thousands, had days like this in their thousands across the south of England that summer. The Friday morning farms walks, the cottage visits, the river fishing, the rose garden, the library reading, the lawn tennis match, the tea on the terrace, the dressing for dinner. The whole pattern, repeated daily, weekly, monthly, year after year. The pattern was the texture of life. It was the pattern that, more than any single dramatic event, was about to disappear. The dinner began at 8:15, which is the Edwardian and post-Edwardian fashionable hour. The custom had drifted later through the 19th century, from 4 in the afternoon in the Regency to 6 in the early Victorian period, to 7:30 in the late Victorian, to 8 by the time the Ashcombes took to dining seriously. There is a social signal embedded in this drift. The earlier you dined, the closer your habits were to the working day. The later you dined, the further you had moved from the rhythms of agricultural and commercial labour into leisured class who were not getting up at 6 and who could afford to keep their kitchens running until 11. By 1914, a fashionable London household might be dining as late as 8:30 or even 9. The Ashcombes, who are slightly more old-fashioned and who like to be in bed by 11:30, have settled on 8:15 as the right hour for them. It gets the dinner over by 10, gives them an hour and a half in the drawing room, and lets them go up at the proper time without making the evening feel rushed. The 5 of them sit down, Sir Edward at the head of the table, his wife at the foot, the 2 sons on one side, the daughter on the other. The table is set for them in the inner section of the great mahogany expanse, 6 places set, with the leaves not added and the rest of the table polished bare. The cloth white damask is fresh from the laundry that morning. The silver is the household's regular service, not the very best plate which is reserved for guest dinners. There are 5 wine glasses at each place, 4 for the different wines of the meal and 1 for water. There are place cards, even though the family knows perfectly well where they sit, because the placement of cards is a habit of the household, and the absence of them would feel like an undressed table. The candles in the candelabra are lit. The new electric chandelier above the table is also on, slightly dimmed by Sir Edward at the switch by the door. The combined light is warm and even. Outside the open French windows, the long July dusk is settling in, the sky still pale to the west, the air motionless. The first course is brought in by William, the younger of the 2 footmen, who has been with the household for 3 years and who is in his evening livery of dark blue with silver buttons. He carries a tureen of consomme madrilène, a clear chilled soup with diced tomato that has become fashionable in the past few years, made by the cook from a beef and chicken stock. She had simmered for 6 hours yesterday and clarified twice. He moves around the table from the left, the soup having already been ladled into porcelain cups in the kitchen. He sets a cup before each diner with the noiseless precision that Mr. Renshaw, the butler, has taught him. Mr. Renshaw himself is at the sideboard, supervising, pouring the wine, attending to the adjustments of the meal. The wine for the first course is a hock from a German vineyard, opened that afternoon, and now standing in its crystal decanter gold pale in the candlelight. The fact that it is a German wine, on the day Austria has just ultimatumed Serbia, is a coincidence none of them remarks on. Sir Edward says grace briefly, in the form he has used since they came to dinner together as a young couple. They cross themselves slightly, in the gentle Anglican manner that is more decorative than devout, and begin. The conversation at dinner in this household has a particular shape, which is worth describing. Sir Edward and Lady Ashcombe, at opposite ends of the table, lead conversation toward their immediate neighbours. He speaks more across the table to Edmund and Hugh on his right, although the table is narrow enough that everyone can hear and contribute. She speaks principally to Lavinia on her side, and to Hugh across from her. The whole table can converse at once when the topic permits, but the underlying structure has each parent paying attention to the children at their own end. The children, when the topic broadens, contribute to the table at large. The first topic of conversation tonight is the morning paper. Hugh, who came down for breakfast late and has read the paper most thoroughly of all of them, says that the Austrian ultimatum to Serbia is the most serious diplomatic document he has read in his life. His father, who is more inclined to take the long view, says that the Balkan crises had been coming and going at 6-month intervals for 15 years, and that the powers had always pulled back from the brink, and that he sees no reason to think they will not do so again. Hugh says that the ultimatum has set such a short deadline, just 48 hours, that the Serbs cannot possibly accept it without abandoning their sovereignty, and that no nation accepts demands like that. Sir Edward concedes the point. Edmund, the soldier, has been listening but has not contributed yet. He says eventually that his colonel had thought the situation looked rather worse than usual, and had cancelled the regimental polo match against the Blues that had been scheduled for next week. He says this in a flat, unemphatic tone, the tone of a man who is reporting a fact that he has not yet fully thought through. Lady Ashcombe says she does not understand what Serbia has to do with England. Sir Edward begins to explain the system of European alliances, but breaks off after a sentence, and says that he is not going to spoil dinner with a lecture on Balkan politics, and that the diplomats will sort it out as they always have, and that the more pressing question is whether Edmund's regimental friends are still coming for the weekend, or whether the cancelled polo match has changed their plans. 3 of them, all subalterns in the battalion, friends from his time at Sandhurst and after. They will arrive by the Saturday afternoon train. They will stay until Monday morning. There will be the village cricket match on the Saturday afternoon, on which Edmund and his friends will play for the village against a team got up by the parish, and Sunday will be church and a long lunch and lawn tennis in the afternoon. The conversation moves to the cricket match. Lavinia says she will keep the score. Hugh says he will umpire. Lady Ashcombe says she had ordered the strawberries to be picked tomorrow morning, in good time for the tea after the match. This is the sort of conversation that in retrospect became almost intolerable to read in family memoirs of the war. The polo cancelled because of the situation, the regimental friends still coming, the cricket on Saturday, strawberries for tea. The certainty that the diplomats would sort it out, the long-established pattern of European crises that always went away. Within 10 days, every plan in this conversation would be cancelled. The regimental friends would be at their barracks under mobilisation orders. The cricket match would be played, but with a quite different undercurrent, and the strawberries would be eaten by a family that had begun, slowly, to understand. None of them suspect any of this at the table. They are talking about the cricket. They are mildly worried about the Balkans, the way they had been mildly worried about a dozen previous Balkan crises in the past decade. Their concern is real, but it is the concern of well-informed people about a remote situation, not the concern of people who think the situation is going to land on their own doorstep. The fish course arrives. It is a poached salmon, caught that morning by the river bailiff in the stretch of the Itchen that runs through the estate, and now presented on a long oval platter with cucumber slices and a bowl of green hollandaise sauce, and a garnish of dill from the kitchen garden. The salmon is a moment of family pride. The Itchen is one of the finest chalk streams in England. The salmon and trout fishing is taken seriously, and a salmon from the home water served at dinner is something the family enjoys with quiet pleasure. Sir Edward serves the fish himself, having made an inclination of the head to William, who steps back from the platter. He takes a long fish slice and divides the salmon onto the warmed plates, with a precision that suggests he has done this many hundreds of times before. The hollandaise is offered around. The salmon is moist, perfectly poached, the flesh pink and flaking slightly. There is a moment of silence as everyone tastes it. This is the finest single dish that will be served tonight. The wine for the fish is a different hock from the estate in the Rheingau that Sir Edward has been buying from for 15 years. The wines coming via a London merchant and then by the slow rail journey down to the estate. The wine cellar at Ashcombe Park in the basement holds about 4,000 bottles, with the older clarets on the lowest shelves where the temperature is most stable, the Burgundies in the middle, the German wines and champagnes in their own bin, the ports and Madeiras separately, and the family's own stock of sherry and brandy near the entrance. The wine cellar is in Mr. Renshaw's domain. He keeps the cellar book. He decides, with Sir Edward, what is to be opened for what occasion. He brought tonight's wines up at 5 o'clock this afternoon and let them stand. He pours them now, moving silently around the table, his white-gloved hand tipping the decanter, his eye on the level in each glass, his expression composed. After the fish, an entree. The entree in the Edwardian dinner is the hot dish that bridges the fish and the main course, served between them and intended to be a lighter piece that demonstrates the cook's skill rather than her capacity for volume. Tonight the entree is sweetbreads in a cream sauce with a dice of mushrooms and a sprinkle of chives served on a piece of toasted bread. The sweetbreads have been carefully prepared by Mrs. Caverley, the cook, that afternoon, having been blanched and pressed and cooled and then sliced and gently sautéed in butter at the last minute. They are tender and slightly sweet against the cream of the sauce. There is a clean glass of a different white wine for the entree, a Chablis this time, paler and crisper than the hocks. The conversation has moved on to the village. Lady Ashcombe has been making her usual round of cottage visits earlier in the week and reports on the news. Mrs. Carter, in the cottage by the lower gate, has had her baby, and it is doing well. Old Mr. Wheeler, who has been ill for some months, is no better and is unlikely to last the summer. The new schoolmistress at the village school has settled in and is making a good impression. The roof of the parish hall is leaking again and will need to be looked at before the winter. Sir Edward says he will speak to Pritchard, the estate carpenter, about the parish hall roof. The conversation flows easily, gently, in this register, the administrative life of a country household that takes the village seriously. The main course is a saddle of lamb, raised on the home farm, hung properly for 10 days and roasted by Mrs. Caverley with rosemary and thyme from the herb garden. The lamb is brought in on a great silver dish carried by Mr. Renshaw himself, who sets it on the sideboard for Sir Edward to carve. Edwardian carving was still done by the master of the house at family dinners, even though by 1914 in fashionable London households, the carving had moved to a sideboard service performed by the butler before the meat was brought to the table. He sharpens his knife briefly on the steel that Mr. Renshaw has placed on the sideboard, takes the great fork in his left hand, and begins. He carves the saddle with the practised unhurry of a man who has been doing this all his adult life. Each slice falls neatly, perfectly even, onto the warmed platter. He sends the platter around with William. The vegetables follow. New potatoes, dressed in butter and parsley. Peas, which Mrs. Caverley has shelled and cooked à la Française, with shredded lettuce and a hint of mint. A dish of broad beans in a parsley sauce. A green salad in a separate bowl, dressed only with oil and vinegar from the cruet. Mint sauce in a silver boat. The lamb is excellent. The wine has changed again, this time to a claret, a Bordeaux from one of the smaller chateaux that Sir Edward has been laying down since his marriage. It is from 1899, a good year, and is now drinking beautifully. The conversation, with the lamb, has moved to Edmund's wedding. The plans are well advanced. The wedding will be at St. George's, Hanover Square, on the 18th of September. Hermione's parents are giving the reception at their house in Belgravia. The honeymoon will be in Italy, a month travelling by easy stages through Florence and Siena and Rome, then home in time for Edmund's regimental duties to resume in the second week of November. The plans are detailed, considered, full of the kind of careful preparations that a family makes for a daughter-in-law's wedding. Lady Ashcombe is going to write to Hermione's mother on Monday about the seating arrangement. Edmund is going to London on Tuesday to see his tailor about an alteration to his uniform for the wedding. Lavinia has been chosen to be one of the bridesmaids and will go up to London next week for a fitting. Hugh, who has not been chosen to be anything in particular, makes a joke about being passed over. The family laughs. The conversation is warm. The kind of conversation a family has when it is anticipating a happy event and is enjoying the run-up to it. None of this wedding will take place. By the 18th of September, the country will have been at war for 6 weeks. Edmund's battalion will be in northern France. The wedding will have been postponed indefinitely, the marquees and caterers and seating plans abandoned. Hermione will spend the next 4 years working in a hospital in London, waiting, like millions of other women, for letters from a young man at the front. The marriage will eventually take place, but it will be in 1919, a much smaller wedding in a chapel near Winchester rather than St. George's, Hanover Square, with Edmund still recovering from wounds he has taken at Passchendaele. None of this is in the room. The wedding being discussed is the September wedding, the first one, the one that did not happen. The family is happy in the planning of it. There is a salad course. Tonight the dessert is a Charlotte Russe, a moulded cream pudding lined with sponge fingers, set in a glass dish, that Mrs. Caverley has been particularly proud of, having made it from a recipe she had written down 10 years ago when she was at her previous place and never tired of. The Charlotte is decorated with crystallized violets from the still room. There are also strawberries picked in the kitchen garden that afternoon, served simply in a glass bowl with cream from the dairy. The strawberries are at their peak. The cream is heavy and yellow, and almost solid. The wine for the dessert is a Sauternes, sweet, golden, served in glasses. Finally, after the dessert, comes the savoury. The savoury was a late Victorian and Edwardian addition to the dinner, a piece of something hot and salty served at the very end of the meal as a kind of palate-clearing flourish, peculiar to the British dinner and unknown on the continent. Tonight the savoury is a simple anchovy on toast, crisp little fingers of toasted bread topped with a thin smear of anchovy paste and a tiny piece of parsley. They are served quickly, eaten in a single bite, and washed down with the last of the claret. The savoury is one of those ceremonies of the British dinner that even in 1914 has begun to feel slightly archaic, but the Ashcombs keep it because it is part of their dinner and part of how they recognise the meal as a meal. The savoury also has the practical virtue of cleansing the palate of the sweetness of the dessert before the gentlemen take port. The dinner has now lasted nearly 2 hours. It is approaching 10 o'clock. The candles in the candelabra have burned down by perhaps an inch. The wine glasses have been emptied and replenished and emptied again. The conversation has moved through the morning's news, the village, the wedding, the upcoming weekend, the lamb, the strawberries. The light outside the French windows has finally gone, replaced by a deep summer blue that is now turning to black. There are stars beginning to be visible. The air is still motionless. From far down the lawn, beyond the ha-ha, beyond the river, comes the very faint sound of an owl in the woods on the far bank. The dining room is now lit only by the chandelier and the candles, the windows being dark, and the room has settled into the warm, enclosed feeling of a meal almost concluded. Lady Ashcombe catches Lavinia's eye. The inclination of the head that means it is time. The two ladies rise together, and after a moment, Sir Edward and the boys rise also, in courtesy. The ladies leave the dining room together, walking out in a slow procession, Lady Ashcombe with her hand briefly on her daughter's arm. They cross the hall and ascend the stairs to the drawing-room. The men remain. Mr. Renshaw, with the practised timing of his profession, is now at the sideboard with the port decanter and 3 glasses. The cloth is cleared by William, the dessert plates carried away, the table reduced to the polished mahogany surface, and the candelabra. A dish of walnuts is placed in front of Sir Edward, with the silver nutcracker. The port is poured. The men settle. The custom of the men remaining over port after the ladies have withdrawn is, by 1914, beginning to look a little dated, particularly to younger people, and in some progressive households it has been quietly abandoned. The Ashcombs maintain it. It is not a long retention. 20 minutes, perhaps half an hour. and then the men will rejoin the ladies in the drawing room. But within that 20 minutes, certain conversations happen that are understood not to take place at the mixed table. Politics, sometimes, when the politics are sharp. Estate matters, when they touch on subjects considered unsuitable for the ladies. Regimental gossip. The kind of slightly more pungent humour that Hugh enjoys, and that he does not employ when his sister is present. Tonight, the conversation across the port is for once almost entirely about Europe. The presence of an army officer on leave with a brother who has been reading the morning paper closely makes the 10 days of crisis a topic that has not yet been fully addressed at the family table. Edmund speaks with more weight here than he had in front of the women. He says that his colonel has put the battalion on a discreet form of standby, with leaves theoretically still being granted, but with officers asked to remain contactable. He says that the regimental quartermaster has been making quiet inquiries about additional ammunition supplies. He says that 2 of his fellow officers, including one of the friends coming for the weekend, have already had their leave shortened by a few days as a precaution. None of this means very much by itself. None of it means certainly that anything is going to happen. But Edmund says, in the frank way of a man speaking to his father, that he thinks the situation is more serious than the public papers suggest, and that he would not be entirely surprised to be back at his battalion within a week. Sir Edward looks at him. He says, after a pause, that if his son's regiment is on standby, the matter is more advanced than he had supposed. He says he will telephone his old friend Lord Dunraven in the morning, who is in the Foreign Office, and ask him quietly what the actual situation is. Hugh says the actual situation is that the Austrians are determined to use this opportunity to crush Serbia, that the Russians cannot allow them to do so without losing their position in the Balkans, that the Germans have given the Austrians a blank check, and that the French and the British are tied to the Russians by the alliance system. Sir Edward says mildly that Hugh is talking like a leading article in the Times. Hugh says he has been reading several leading articles in the Times. Edmund laughs briefly at this, and the moment of slight tension dissolves. But Sir Edward, after a further pause, says something he has not said before, and that he says with a particular gentleness that his sons recognize as the sound of him meaning what he says. He says that if there is going to be a war, and the powers cannot pull back from it as they always have before, then the consequences will be worse than anyone is preparing for. He says that the European armies are now larger and better organized than at any time in their history. He says that the weapons are more terrible, the artillery and the machine guns and the new aeroplanes, than anything Europe has ever fielded. He says that a war between the great powers in 1914 will not be the kind of brief decisive war that Bismarck fought and won in 1870. It will be slower, longer, more grinding, and more destructive than anyone is allowing themselves to think. He says he hopes very much that he is wrong. Edmund and Hugh say nothing for a moment. Then Edmund says quietly that he hopes so too. It is the only moment of the evening when any of them comes close to articulating what is coming. They do not come closer. Sir Edward, with the practiced tact of a man who has presided over many family dinners, changes the subject. He asks Hugh whether he has thought any more about the chambers in Lincoln's Inn that he had been considering. Hugh says he has vaguely, and that he expects to make some inquiries in October when the legal year resumes. The conversation moves on. The port goes around once more. The walnuts are cracked and eaten. After perhaps 25 minutes in total, Sir Edward rises. He says it is time they joined the ladies. The boys rise with him. They leave the dining room and cross the hall and go up to the drawing room together. The drawing room at Ashcombe Park, when the men come into it from the hall, is at its most agreeable hour. The French windows at the south end of the room, which during the day have been folded back to admit the air and the light, are still partly open, the curtains not yet drawn. The summer night is coming in. The lamps are lit, but softly. There is no fire, the evening being too warm. The room smells faintly of beeswax, very faintly of the white roses in the bowl on the centre table, and underneath these scents the indefinable accumulated smell of the room itself, the particular smell of a long-inhabited drawing-room which is composed of polished wood and old books and silk damask, and the residue of hundreds of evenings of family life. The room was begun, in its present form, in the 1820s, when the wing it occupies was added to the original Palladian house. The walls are panelled in white painted wood to a height of about 4 feet, with the silk damask above, and the cornice and the ceiling are picked out in white with the original plasterwork detail still visible after almost 100 years. The marble fireplace by an Italian carver who was working in London in the 1820s is a delicate thing, classical in its motifs, with 2 slender caryatids supporting the lintel and a relief of a stag at rest in the centre panel. The mantelpiece is crowded with the accumulations of 3 generations of Ashcombes who have used the room, a pair of bronze candlesticks, a clock by Mudge that no longer keeps perfect time and is kept for sentimental reasons, a pair of Chinese export figurines that Sir Edward's grandfather brought home from the East, a photograph in a silver frame of Edmund as a boy, a photograph in another frame of Sir Edward and Lady Ashcombe on the day of their engagement, a jade carving that Lavinia had bought at a sale in Bond Street last month with her own money, a larger bronze of a horse, which had been Sir Edward's father's favourite hunter, cast posthumously after the horse had broken its leg in 1882. The room is lit on this July evening by a combination of light sources that taken together capture the precise moment in domestic illumination at which 1914 sits. There are 2 electric lamps on side tables, with silk shades, switched on but turned down. There is a pair of oil lamps on a console table, lit despite the electricity, because Sir Edward likes their warmer quality, and because the Edwardian taste was reluctant to abandon all the old forms of light just because the new one had arrived. There are wax candles in candelabra at 2 or 3 points around the room, also lit. The combined effect is a room of multiple soft pools of light, more like the candlelit world of 100 years earlier than the evenly illuminated rooms of 50 years later. The electric light is present, but it has not yet flooded the room. It is an addition to the older lighting, not a replacement of it. The electrification of Ashcombe Park in 1908 was Sir Edward's project. He had been to the houses of 1 or 2 friends who had installed their own generating plants, had been impressed by the convenience and the brightness of the electric light, and the fact that it did not have to be lit and could not set anything on fire, and had decided that his own house should have it. The work had taken 6 months. A dynamo was installed in a brick engine house behind the stables, driven by a coal-fired boiler. A network of wiring was run through the walls of the house in lead-sheathed cables that the electrician had threaded through holes drilled in the joists. Brass wall switches were installed at the doors of every principal room. Brass-cased ceiling roses were installed in the drawing room, the dining room, the library, the principal bedrooms. The wiring was by modern standards eccentric and dangerous. The house had been wired by a Hampshire firm with limited experience of country houses. The electricity supply was unreliable and would fail occasionally, throwing the house briefly into darkness until the generator was reset or the boiler was stoked. But on most evenings it worked and provided a steady, clear light that no candle or oil lamp had ever quite managed. Yet the older lights were still in use, and the family preferred them to be. There was, in the late Edwardian taste, a feeling that the new electric light, while convenient, was a little harsh, a little too bright, a little too modern for the rooms of an old house. Country house people often kept their oil lamps in service for years after they had had electricity installed, lighting them in the evenings for atmosphere. The practical arrangement, in many houses, was electric light in the corridors and the kitchens and the servants' wing, where what was wanted was illumination rather than mood, and a mixed lighting in the principal rooms, where the wax candles and oil lamps were lit alongside the electric for the warmer effect. Ashcombe Park follows this pattern. The electric lamps are on tonight, but they are turned down. The candles are doing the principal work of lighting Lady Ashcombe's face and her daughter's face as they sit on the long sofa near the fireplace. The oil lamps are doing the lighting of the further parts of the room. The men come in, Sir Edward, then Edmund, then Hugh. The transition from the dining room to the drawing room is one of the choreographies of the country house evening. The ladies, who have been in the drawing room for perhaps 25 minutes, have settled into it. Coffee, in the modern Edwardian fashion, has already been brought up by one of the maids, and is laid out on a round table near the fireplace. Lady Ashcombe has poured for herself and her daughter. There are 3 more cups waiting. The coffee is from a silver pot that has been kept warm over a spirit lamp on the table. There is hot milk in a jug, and brown sugar in a bowl, and tiny silver spoons. The arrival of coffee, after dinner, in the drawing room, is one of the things that has changed in the past 100 years. In Regency households, the after-dinner drink in the drawing room was tea. In high Victorian households, both tea and coffee were served, with most ladies preferring tea. By the late Victorian and Edwardian period, coffee had quietly become the standard after-dinner drink in fashionable households, with tea retreating to its older role as the afternoon drink. The Ashcombes follow the modern convention: coffee at 10:30 after dinner, tea earlier in the day, at 4 in the afternoon, in its own ritual. The 2 drinks are kept separate, performing different social functions. Sir Edward kisses his wife on the forehead as he passes her, takes a cup of coffee from the table, adds neither milk nor sugar, and settles into his favourite chair, the deep button-backed leather armchair near the second fireplace at the far end of the room. He has brought a book with him from the library, a volume of Boswell's Life of Johnson that he reads regularly and is currently rereading. He places the book on the table beside his chair. He does not open it yet. He looks across at his wife, smiles slightly, and says that the evening is perfect. Lady Ashcombe agrees that it is. Edmund, who has come in behind his father, takes a cup of coffee from the table, kisses his mother briefly, and goes over to the French windows where he stands for a moment, looking out into the dark garden. The air outside is cool now, and very still. Hugh, last in, takes coffee, drops himself into a sofa near the piano, and asks Lavinia what she has been thinking about all evening, because she has been quiet. Lavinia says she has not been thinking about anything in particular. Hugh, with brotherly persistence, says that he doesn't believe her. Lavinia laughs and says it is none of his business. The teasing is gentle. The family is settling. What happens now in the drawing room of an Edwardian country house at 10:30 on a summer evening is what has happened in similar drawing rooms across the social class for more than a century. The family settles into its various activities separately and together. The room is large enough and the activities are quiet enough that several different things can happen simultaneously without disturbing each other. Sir Edward, in his armchair, reads. Lady Ashcombe and Lavinia, on the sofa, are looking at a fashion magazine that Lavinia has brought down with her, the most recent number of the Lady's Pictorial, with engravings of the new dresses for the late summer. Hugh is at the piano, idly picking out a tune he has been working on for some weeks, a composition of his own that may or may not be finished. Edmund, having stood at the French windows for some minutes, has come back into the room and is now looking at the books on the table near the second sofa, picking up first one and then another. The room hums very gently with the private occupations of 5 people who know each other well and who are content to be in the same room together without all of them doing the same thing. The pianoforte at Ashcombe Park is a Bechstein Grand, German-made, bought new in 1895, and one of the better domestic pianos of its generation. It sits at the far end of the drawing room, near the windows, with a Persian carpet beneath it, and a music stand, and a piano stool of polished walnut. The lid is currently propped half open. Hugh, who plays seriously when he plays at all, has been working since June on a piece of his own composition, an arrangement of an old Hampshire folk song that his mother used to sing to him as a child. He plays it through quietly now, the melody emerging slowly under his fingers in the warm light of the drawing room, the bass line steady underneath, the room listening without quite listening, the way a family listens to one of its members playing the piano. The piano in the country house in 1914 is at an interesting moment in its history. It has been the dominant musical instrument of the European bourgeoisie for more than 100 years. Almost every house of the Ashcombe's class has one. Almost every educated young woman has been taught to play it. Almost every household evening, of any size, has at some point involved someone sitting down at the piano and playing or singing. The piano has been the central technology of domestic music since the early 19th century. But by 1914, a new technology has begun to compete with it, and that new technology is in the drawing room tonight as well, sitting on a table near the second sofa. It is a gramophone, a wooden cabinet machine made by his master's voice, the gramophone company, with the great brass horn rising from the top, the spindle for the records in the centre, the heavy clockwork mechanism inside the cabinet that drives the turntable, the handle on the side for winding it up. There is a stack of records beside it on the table, in their plain paper sleeves, perhaps 40 in total, accumulated by Lavinia over the past 2 years from the music shop in Winchester and the larger record department at Harrods. They include opera arias sung by Caruso and Melba and Tetrazzini, dance music recorded by London bands, vocal selections from popular musical comedies, several Schubert songs, 2 recordings by the new Russian dancer Pavlova's accompanist, and a few of the early dance band records that have just begun to appear. The gramophone has been in the household for 3 years. Sir Edward had been doubtful when Lavinia first asked for one, on the grounds that he did not see the point of canned music when one had a perfectly good piano in the house and a daughter who could play it. Lavinia had argued that the gramophone gave one access to performances by the great singers and orchestras that one could not otherwise hear without going to London. Sir Edward had eventually been persuaded. The gramophone had arrived. It had been a quiet revolution in the domestic music of the household, although nobody at the time had described it as such. For the first time in the Ashcombe's history, music could be heard in the drawing room without anyone in the family playing it. The voices of singers from Milan and New York and London could fill the room, on demand, for the cost of a few shillings per record, and the physical effort of winding the machine and changing the needle. This is, for the social history of music, a turning point that the Ashcombs do not yet recognise. The gramophone and the radio that will follow it in another 10 years will end the long age of domestic music making. The piano will become a less central instrument. The general level of amateur musical skill in the educated population will begin a long, slow decline. Music will become something one listens to rather than something one makes. The transition will happen slowly over several decades, but the seeds of it are sitting on the table near the second sofa in a wooden cabinet with a brass horn, in this drawing room in 1914. Tonight, however, the gramophone is not in use. Hugh is at the piano, and the family, by the slight unspoken protocol that operates in such rooms, leaves the piano to him as long as he is playing. He finishes his folk song. He pauses, looking at the keyboard. He shifts into something else, a slower piece, a transcription he has made of an Elgar tune, the sound of which fills the room for a few minutes, with a particular reflective quality that everyone in the room responds to without commenting on. Hugh's playing is technically irregular but musically sensitive. He misses notes. He gets through to what the piece is saying. Lady Ashcombe on the sofa has stopped looking at the fashion magazine and is listening with her head slightly inclined. Sir Edward has put down his Boswell. Edmund has settled into a chair near the French windows and is looking out at the night. Lavinia has put aside the magazine and is looking at her brother's profile at the piano, and there is something in her expression, a sort of quiet attention, that suggests she is hearing the piece more deeply than the rest of them. Although she does not say anything, the piece ends. Hugh closes the keyboard. There is a silence. Then Sir Edward, in his easy way, says that he had not heard that arrangement before, that it was very fine, and asks whether Hugh might play it again sometime when he has worked it through completely. He gets up from the piano and comes to sit on the sofa with his sister. Lavinia squeezes his hand briefly. He squeezes back. The moment is and unremarkable, but it is the kind of unremarkable moment that runs through every evening of a family that loves each other. Now comes the bridge. Bridge, by 1914, has replaced whist as the dominant card game of the educated middle and upper classes. The transition has happened across the previous 20 years. Whist, the game we saw in the Allertons' Bath drawing room in 1815, had been the standard four-handed card game of polite society for over a century by the time it began to be displaced. The replacement game arrived through several stages. First came Birich or Russian whist in the 1880s, then auction bridge in the 1900s. By 1914, auction bridge has settled into something close to its modern form, with bidding for the contract before the play, with dummy hands exposed, with the trump suit determined by the auction rather than by the chance of the dealt card. The game is more strategic than whist, more open in its information, more conversational in its play. It has spread quickly through the country, displacing whist almost entirely in fashionable households within 15 years. The Ashcombs, like most of their friends, play bridge. The card table, which has been folded against the wall behind the piano, is now brought out and set up in the centre of the room. It is a square table covered in green baize, the same baize that has covered card tables in this country for 200 years. There are 4 chairs drawn up around it. The cards are kept in an inlaid wooden box on a shelf near the table, 2 complete decks of 52 cards each, plus a brass bell of the kind used to summon the dummy. There is a scoring pad and 2 pencils. There are 4 ashtrays, although tonight no one is smoking in the drawing room. The 4 players tonight are Sir Edward, Lady Ashcombe, Edmund, and Hugh. Lavinia has chosen not to play. She is, she says, going to read. The 4 players cut for partners. Sir Edward and Lady Ashcombe draw the higher cards and are partnered. Edmund and Hugh draw the lower and are partnered. The arrangement amuses everyone. The Ashcombe parents play together against their sons. This is in fact the usual arrangement when the family plays among themselves, partly because the parents are the more experienced players, and partly because the partnership rivalry between parents and sons is the kind of light competitive structure that the family enjoys. The first hand is dealt. Sir Edward deals, having drawn the highest card. 13 cards to each player, dealt one at a time, clockwise, starting with the player to his left. The cards are picked up. Each player sorts their hand by suit. Sir Edward considers his cards. The auction begins. He opens with a bid of 1 heart. Lady Ashcombe, his partner, considers her hand and bids 2 hearts. Edmund, on her left, says no bid. Hugh, on Sir Edward's left, bids 2 spades. The auction continues. The contract is settled in 3 hearts to Sir Edward and Lady Ashcombe. The play begins. Edmund leads the first card. Lady Ashcombe lays down her hand as dummy. Sir Edward studies the dummy and the cards he has been led, considers his line of play, and begins to take the tricks. The play of a hand of bridge takes perhaps 8 or 10 minutes. The conversation around the card table is light. There is a particular convention about bridge conversation. During the actual play of the hand, when cards are being led and tricks are being taken, talk is supposed to be minimal, on the grounds that the play requires concentration and that talk can convey information that would be unfair. Between hands, when the cards are being shuffled and dealt, conversation flows freely. The card table has its own atmosphere, partly competitive, partly cooperative, within partnerships, partly entirely sociable. The Ashcombes play 3 hands of the rubber, which is the standard unit of bridge scoring, before the game is interrupted, briefly, by a domestic moment. Lady Ashcombe, who has been doing well as the dummy of the second hand, asks her husband whether he had spoken to Pritchard about the parish hall roof. Sir Edward, who has been concentrating on his cards, looks up and says he had not yet, but would do so first thing on Monday morning. Lady Ashcombe says mildly that she had told Mrs. Galbraith from the parish that it would be looked at this week, and that Mrs. Galbraith would no doubt be telling everyone in the village, and that it would therefore be appreciated if the matter were attended to. Sir Edward, with the half-smile of a man who has been gently disciplined by his wife, says he understands and will see to it. The hand resumes. The cards are dealt. The play continues. The matter of the parish hall roof has been disposed of in the gentle Ashcombe way, with no great fuss, but with the understanding that it will be done. The bridge continues for perhaps 3/4 of an hour. 2 rubbers are completed. Sir Edward and Lady Ashcombe win the first. Edmund and Hugh win the second. The score is even. Lady Ashcombe says she has had enough. The cards are gathered, the table is folded, the chairs are returned to their positions. Sir Edward goes back to his chair and his Boswell. Edmund takes a place on the sofa. Hugh wanders back to the piano but does not play. He stands with his hand on the keyboard, looking at the stack of music on the music stand, choosing nothing. The evening is now about 3 hours past dinner. It is approaching 11:30. The family has reached the long quiet stretch of an evening that is its own particular kind of pleasure. The conversation has slowed. The room is settled. The lamps and candles have burned down by perhaps an inch each. The night outside the windows is now properly dark, the stars over the lawn quite visible, the sound of the river just barely audible. Inside, the private occupations of the family resume. Sir Edward reads. Lady Ashcombe has picked up some embroidery from her work basket beside the sofa, a piece she is working in petit point that will be a cushion cover when it is finished. Lavinia is reading a novel that came down by the midweek post, a new book by E.M. Forster called Howard's End, which she has been working through for a fortnight. Edmund has the most recent number of Country Life and is looking at the photographs of country houses in Yorkshire. Hugh, who never settles to one thing for long, has gone over to the gramophone and is looking at the records. He selects one. It is a recording of Caruso singing an aria from Tosca, made the previous year in a New York studio. He places the record on the turntable, wins the gramophone, lowers the needle. The room fills, suddenly, with a great voice. The recording is hoarse by modern standards, full of the surface noise that the early gramophone could not eliminate, but the voice itself, the voice of the most celebrated tenor of the age, comes through it with an intensity that no domestic piano could match. The aria is the one in which the painter Cavaradossi, awaiting execution at dawn, sings of the stars and the earth and the sweetness of life. The Italian words mean nothing precise to most of the family, who speak some French but not Italian, but the emotional content of the music is perfectly clear. The voice rises and falls. The orchestra surges and drops away. The aria ends with the long-held note that Caruso made famous, a note of grief and longing held for an impossible duration, the sound of a man who knows he is about to die, singing of the love he is leaving behind. The recording ends. The needle hisses for a moment in the run-out groove. Hugh lifts the arm. The room is quiet again. Nobody speaks for several seconds. There is something about the aria in this room on this evening that has affected everyone slightly more than such things usually do. Lady Ashcombe wipes her eyes briefly with the back of her hand. Sir Edward, who has put down his book, says quietly that Caruso is the finest tenor of the age, and that they are fortunate to live in a time when such voices can be heard at home as well as in the opera house. Edmund says nothing. He is looking out the window. Lavinia, who has been listening with an expression that suggests she has been moved more than she expects, rises from her chair and goes over to the gramophone and asks Hugh whether he will play her something else. Hugh asks what. She says she does not mind. He selects another record, more cheerful this time, a recording of an old English song called Drink to Me Only with Thine Eyes, sung by John McCormack. The mood lightens slightly. The family settles back into its activities. The Caruso has been put back in its sleeve. I want to step away from the drawing room briefly and tell you about the people who are making this evening possible. Because behind the calm surface of the family in their drawing room, behind the perfect dinner that has just been served, behind the lamps that have been lit, and the fire that has been laid, and the coffee that has been poured, and the cards that have been brought out, there is a separate parallel evening going on in another part of the house, conducted by a substantial number of people whose names will not be remembered by history, but whose work makes the whole thing possible. The household at Ashcombe Park in the summer of 1914 consists of 23 indoor and outdoor staff. It is a moderate establishment by the standards of the great houses. The very largest country houses, the Chatsworths and Blenheims and Wobburns, employed staff in the hundreds. The Ashcombes are at a more modest scale. They have what was considered, in the period, a comfortable establishment for a baronet with their income and their style of living. 23 staff sounds enormous to modern ears, and it is, but in the context of country house life in 1914, it is a perfectly normal number. The senior figures of the household are 5. They are the people who run things, who supervise the others, who occupy the named positions that carry authority and respect. At the head, on the male side, is Mr. Renshaw, the butler. Renshaw is 52 years old. He has been at Ashcombe Park for 16 years, having come to the household in 1898 from a previous position at a similar house in Wiltshire. Before that, he had worked his way up through several country house establishments since starting as a hall boy at the age of 14. He is the senior male servant, the head of the male side of the household, the man responsible for the dining room, the wine cellar, the silver plate, the male staff, the discipline and conduct of the household at all formal occasions. He answers directly to Sir Edward. He maintains a correct relationship of distance with the family, never first naming anyone except to the children when they were small, always addressing Sir Edward as Sir Edward and Lady Ashcombe as her ladyship, and the children as Master Edmund and Mr. Hugh and Miss Lavinia and Miss Beatrice. He wears a formal black coat in the daytime and white tie in the evening when in attendance at dinner. He is paid £60 a year plus all found, which is to say his food, his accommodation, his beer, his livery, and allowance for laundry. His own accommodation is but comfortable room near the butler's pantry on the ground floor of the service wing, with his own fireplace and his own writing desk, and a bookshelf with a Bible and a Dickens and a couple of practical works on butler's duties. He never married. He does not expect to. The butlership has been his life. On the female side, the senior figure is Mrs. Burgess, the housekeeper. Mrs. Burgess is 48, a widow of a Hampshire shopkeeper who died young, and she has been at Ashcombe Park for 20 years. She came as a senior housemaid in 1894 and was promoted to housekeeper when the previous one retired in 1902. She runs the female side of the household. The housemaids, the kitchen maids, the laundry maids, the still room maid all answer to her. She keeps the household accounts in a careful hand, in a series of leather-bound books that she has filled across her 2 decades in the post. She supervises the linen, the stores, the still room where preserves and cordials are made, the cleaning of the principal rooms, the laundry. She has the keys to the linen cupboard, the china cupboards, the silver safe, sifastatis hai, drawn, ishia, tishrisninsele. The still room. She wears a black dress with a white collar and a chatelaine at her waist from which the keys hang. She is, like Mr. Renshaw, a quiet figure, professionally correct, considerably more powerful than her unobtrusive presence suggests. Her wages are £45 a year plus all found. Mrs. Caverley, the cook, is the third of the senior figures. She is 39, has been at Ashcombe Park for 7 years, and has been working in country house kitchens since she was 16. She came up through the kitchens of several substantial houses in the south of England before reaching the position of cook at Ashcombe Park, which is the position she had been working toward for 15 years. She is responsible for the kitchen. She supervises the kitchen maids and the scullery maid. She plans the menus, consults with Lady Ashcombe each morning at 9:30 in the housekeeper's room, marketed in the village and the local town for what could not be supplied by the estate, and produces, day in and day out, the breakfasts and luncheons and dinners and the meals between. She is paid £50 a year, which is rather better than the cook in a comparable London household would receive, partly because country house cooks were considered to require greater range than their London counterparts, partly because the labour market in rural Hampshire was tight enough that good cooks could command somewhat higher wages. Her domain is the kitchen. She is a queen there, with absolute authority within its walls. Mr. Pemberton, Sir Edward's valet, is the fourth of the senior staff. A valet is the personal manservant of a gentleman. His duties are to keep his master's clothes in perfect order, to lay them out for him each day according to the day's engagements, to dress and undress him, to shave him, to handle his personal items, his watch, his cufflinks, his stick, his hat, to pack and unpack his trunks when he travels. Pemberton is 45, has been Sir Edward's valet for 18 years, knows him better than any other person in the household, and is paid £60 a year plus everything found. He is, in the hierarchy of country house servants, on a level with the butler and the housekeeper, and slightly above the cook. He eats with them in the housekeeper's room, where the senior staff dined separately from the lower servants in the servants' hall. Miss Howard, Lady Ashcombe's lady's maid, is the fifth of the senior staff. She is 33, the daughter of a clergyman in Devon who had fallen on hard times and who had taken service as the only respectable employment available to her when her father died and the family income disappeared. She has been Lady Ashcombe's lady's maid for 10 years. Her duties are to dress and undress her mistress, to maintain her mistress's clothes in perfect order, to do her hair, to attend her at all formal occasions where personal attention is required, to sit up to undress her at night, however late she has been out, to handle her jewellery, her perfumes, her personal effects. Ladies' maids were considered the most refined of the female servant positions, requiring a particular combination of skill with clothes, sympathy with the mistress's moods, discretion about personal matters, and a slightly more educated background than the housemaids. Miss Howard, being a clergyman's daughter, fits this profile exactly. She speaks French, which is useful because Lady Ashcombe sometimes corresponded with French friends and required her letters read or her replies dictated. She is paid £40 a year plus all found, plus the substantial perquisite of her mistress's discarded clothes, which by tradition a lady's maid received as part of her position. Below these five, in the household hierarchy, are the lower servants. There are 2 footmen, William and Thomas. William, 23, has been at Ashcombe Park for 3 years. Thomas, 19, joined the household last spring. They wear dark blue livery with silver buttons and white gloves when on duty in the dining room or when answering the front door. Their duties include serving at meals, answering the door, attending to the family's various needs, polishing the silver, carrying coal, fetching and carrying things across the house, attending Sir Edward and the boys when they go out shooting, or otherwise need a man to carry their guns and game. Footmen were paid £25 to £30 a year. They were chosen partly for height and good looks, footmen of matching height and presentable appearance being an old country house tradition that persisted into 1914. They lived in their own rooms in the male servants' quarters in the service wing. There are 3 housemaids. Sarah, the head housemaid, is 28 and has been at Ashcombe Park for 8 years. She has charge of the upper floor cleaning, the bedrooms, the principal corridors. Annie, the second housemaid, is 22. Lily, the under housemaid, is 16. They sweep, they dust, they polish, they make the beds, they tend the bedroom fires when there are fires, They bring up the hot water cans in the morning. They empty the slop pails. They shake the rugs. They change the linen. The housemaid's work is the heart of the cleaning of the house. It is hard physical labour, conducted at unsocial hours, beginning before the family is up and continuing past the time the family has gone out for the day. Wages are £18 to £25 a year. Lily, the youngest, has only been with the household for 6 months. She came from a village in the next valley. She is still learning her work. In the kitchen, under Mrs. Caverley, are 2 kitchen maids and a scullery maid. The kitchen maids, Ellen and Mary, are responsible for the rougher work of the kitchen, the preparation of vegetables, the basic cooking of less important dishes, the setting up of the kitchen each morning, the cleaning of the kitchen at night. The scullery maid, who is 14 and called Maud, is responsible for the washing up, the scrubbing of pots and pans, the cleaning of the scullery itself. Maud's wages are £12 a year. She rises at 5:30 in the morning and is rarely in bed before 11 at night. She has, by 1914, been with the household for 1 year. She is the most junior member of the indoor establishment, and she has the hardest physical work of any of them. There is also Miss Tyrrell, the governess, who occupies the strange middle position that governesses always occupied in country houses. She is 31, the daughter of a Cambridge don who had died when she was 19, leaving his daughter with a good education but no money. She has been with the Ashcombs for 3 years, since Beatrice was 9, and is responsible for Beatrice's education in all subjects except music and dancing. Miss Tyrrell speaks French and German, plays the piano well enough to accompany hymns, has a sound knowledge of English literature and history and arithmetic, and is, at 31, beginning to wonder what her future holds when Beatrice goes off to school in 2 years' time. She eats with the family for breakfast, takes her lunch in the schoolroom with Beatrice, and dines either in the dining room with the family or in the schoolroom alone, depending on the household plans for the evening. Tonight she has dined in the schoolroom with Beatrice, because the family have wished to have a private dinner together. She is now in her own sitting room next to the schoolroom on the 2nd floor, reading a novel by Mrs. Humphrey Ward before going to bed. Her position in the household is socially intermediate. She is not a servant, exactly. She is not family. She is a lady, but a lady in employment. She is, like all governesses, slightly lonely in her position. She is paid £40 a year plus board and lodging. Outside, the establishment continues. There is Mr. Brown, the head gardener, who lives in a cottage in the kitchen garden with his wife and daughter, and who has been at Ashcombe Park for 30 years. There are 3 under-gardeners, who lodge in the village and come up each day. There is Mr. Hardaker, the coachman, who is becoming a slightly archaic figure as the motor cars take over, but who still maintains the carriage horses and is occasionally called upon to drive Lady Ashcombe in the brougham when she does not want to take the motor car. There is Mr. Maddox, the chauffeur, who is younger, smarter, and dressed in a different uniform of dark green livery with a peaked cap. He is responsible for the Daimler and the Riley that Sir Edward bought last year. There are 2 grooms in the stables. There is Mr. Goss, the gamekeeper, who lives in a cottage at the edge of the woods, and who is a particular favourite of Hugh's, having taught him to shoot when he was 12. There is Mr. Pritchard, the estate carpenter, and his wife, who runs the laundry on a contract basis, the laundry being a separate building behind the kitchen garden where the household linen is washed and ironed. Below stairs at this hour, the work of the day is finishing. In the kitchen, The dishes from the family dinner are being washed and put away. Mrs. Caverley is supervising the close of the day. She has prepared the soaking of dried fruit for tomorrow's pudding and has set out the pots she will need at 5 o'clock the next morning when she begins again. The kitchen maids are scrubbing the dresser table with sand and lye. Maud, the scullery maid, is at the stone sink in the scullery, her arms in hot water up to the elbows, working through the great copper pans that the lamb had been cooked in. The kitchen range, which has been burning since 5 in the morning, is being damped down. The fire will hold its heat through the night, ready to be brought back up at 5:30 when Mrs. Caverley returns to begin the next day. In the housekeeper's room, Mrs. Burgess is at her desk going over the day's accounts. She enters the notes, the grocer's bill from the village, the fish, which had been caught locally, and so was on the estate's own books rather than a separate account. The cost of the new wax candles ordered from Winchester last week. She balances the day's expenditure. She locks the desk. She crosses to the linen cupboard, checks that everything is in order for the morning, and locks that too. She crosses to the still room, which she keeps her eye on personally, and checks the row of preserve jars and cordial bottles. The still room is her private domain in a particular way. She makes the household preserves there each summer, the jams and chutneys and pickles, the cordials and the herbal preparations. The still room is where she most clearly is herself. In the butler's pantry, Mr. Renshaw is going over the wine for tomorrow. The weekend will require additional wines because of the regimental friends arriving, and he has been thinking through the menu Mrs. Caverley is planning. He decants the wines that need decanting. He replaces the silver in the safe. He locks the safe. He damps down the fire in his pantry. He goes out to the front hall and checks that the front door is bolted and the chains are on, then walks the length of the ground floor corridor checking each door. He returns to the butler's pantry, takes down his account book, and enters the wines used at dinner. The book has been his routine for 16 years. In the laundry, in the separate building behind the kitchen garden, the lights have been out for hours. The laundry day is Monday and Tuesday. Tonight the building is dark and empty. In the stable yard, Mr. Hardiker, the coachman, has finished his evening rounds, has checked the horses for the night, has banked the fire in the harness room, and has gone to his cottage. The horses are quiet. The motor garage is locked. Mr. Maddox, the chauffeur, has gone home to his lodging in the village. In the gamekeeper's cottage at the edge of the woods, Mr. Goss has eaten his supper, smoked his pipe, and is in bed. He will be up at 4 in the morning to walk the boundaries of the shoot, checking for poachers in the long July dawn. This is the household. 23 indoor and outdoor staff working at their various tasks at their various hours, sustaining the existence of the family in the drawing room. Most of them, on this Friday evening of the last summer, are about to finish their day. Most of them will be in bed by midnight. Most of them, the women anyway, will rise before the family in the morning. Many of them, like Mr. Renshaw and Mrs. Burgess and Mrs. Caverley, have been at Ashcombe Park for a decade or two and consider it their home in a more or less complete sense. They will, all of them, see the household begin to break apart in the next few years. By 1916, William the footman and Thomas the second footman and one of the undergardeners and Mr. Maddox the chauffeur will have all enlisted. By 1918, William and Thomas and one of the undergardeners will be dead. By 1920, the establishment will be reduced to 14. By 1925, it will be at 9. The country house establishment, which had seemed like a fact of nature in 1914, would by 1939 look like an artifact of a vanished age, and by 1960 would seem nearly incomprehensible. Mr. Renshaw, who is 52 on this evening of July 1914, will retire in 1932 from a much reduced household and will live out his life in a cottage on the edge of the village that the family will give him in pension. He will live until 1948. He will see the Second World War begin and end. He will know by then that the world he had served in his youth was as remote as the 18th century. But that is the long view. Tonight, the household is intact. The family is in the drawing room. The servants are below stairs and in the various corners of the establishment. The whole machinery of the country house is humming in its accustomed rhythm. We will go back upstairs to the drawing room now and stay with the family for the last hour of their evening before they go up to bed. The last hour of the evening, after the bridge and the gramophone, settles into the slowest and most reflective part of the night. This is the hour, in any country house drawing room, when the room becomes most itself. The activity of the meal is over. The bridge is finished. The conversation has wound down naturally to the point where everyone is content to do their own quiet thing and to be in the same room together without the room having to be busy. Sir Edward is in his armchair with the Boswell open on his lap, reading slowly, the kind of reading you do when you are not in any hurry to finish. He has known the book intimately for 30 years. He is rereading the section in which Johnson is in his old age, and Boswell is recording his table talk with the particular intense attention of a man who knows he is in the presence of something not to be lost. There is a smile on Sir Edward's face as he reads. He turns a page. Page rustle is one of the few sounds in the room. Lady Ashcombe, on the sofa, is back at her petit point. The needle goes in and out of the fine canvas, slowly, evenly, with the rhythm of a woman who has been doing this kind of work since her own mother taught her to do it as a child. The cushion cover she is making is a copy of an 18th century piece she had seen at a friend's house in the spring, a design of stylized roses and leaves on a pale background. She expects it will take her another 6 months to finish. She is quite content. She is not really looking at her work in the deepest sense. She is letting her mind move slowly through a private inventory of the things on it. Beatrice's progress with French, the arrangements for Edmund's wedding, the persistent ache in her left side, the schedule of cottage visits for the coming week, her own mother's 90th birthday in October. The kind of slow internal scroll of the mind that an older woman with a settled life and a household to manage runs through, intermittently, while her hands do something else. Lavinia, in the chair by the second fireplace, is reading her novel. Howard's End is by 1914 6 years old, having been published in 1910, but Lavinia has only just got round to it. She is finding it more affecting than she had expected. There is a passage near the end, which she is now approaching, in which one of the principal characters dies, and the surviving characters have to think about the meaning of the life that has been lost. She is reading slowly. She is, in some way that she does not quite identify, finding the book to be addressing things she has been thinking about herself for some weeks. The London season just ended. The 2 proposals she had received and declined. The question of what kind of life she wants to lead. The way certain assumptions she had grown up with about her own future were beginning to seem, this summer, less obvious than they had once seemed. The book, with its intelligent women, and its men of various worth, and its brilliant elderly mother dying in a country house, was speaking to her in a way that made her feel, occasionally, that she had to put it down for a moment and look out of the window. Edmund, who has been quiet for some time, is on the sofa near the French windows and is now sitting with his hands clasped behind his head, looking up at the ceiling. He has not picked up a book. He has not played the piano. He has not asked to be dealt into another rubber of bridge. He is doing something the family does not often see him do, which is sitting and thinking. He is thinking about what his father had said about the war. He is thinking about Hermione, who he has not seen for a fortnight, and who he will see again next Wednesday when he goes up to London. He is thinking about his battalion, his company, the men he is responsible for, the rifle drill they had been doing the morning he had gone on leave, the new drafts that had come in from the depot in June. He is thinking, in particular, about a young subaltern in his company, a boy of 19 called Rowley, who had only joined the regiment in May, and who had impressed Edmund as the kind of young officer who would do well. Rowley is currently with the battalion at Wellington Barracks. Rowley will be in France with him within a month. Rowley will be dead within 5 months, killed at First Ypres on the 15th of November in a German attack on the Hooge sector. Edmund does not know this. He is just thinking, in the abstract way of a captain on leave, about his junior subaltern. The young man's face, smiling, the face of a boy who has just begun his career, comes to him in the drawing room of his parents' house, and stays for a moment, and goes again. Hugh, having put the records back in their place, has taken down a book from the shelves, a volume of Tennyson that he has owned since he was at school, and has settled with it on the sofa. He opens it at random. He lands on the In Memoriam, the long elegy Tennyson had written for his friend Arthur Hallam, which Hugh had studied at Oxford, and which he knows in places by heart. The book falls open at a section he loves, the section in which Tennyson reflects on the year turning, on the new year coming in, on the bells of the old year ringing out and new year ringing in. He reads it slowly. The poetry is, by the standards of 1914, slightly old-fashioned. The Victorian elegiac mode has begun to seem, to younger writers, a little too consoling, a little too sweetened. But the poem is still full of moments of a kind of grief and longing that come through whatever the change in literary fashion. Hugh, reading it, does not connect it consciously to anything in his current life, but he is aware that the poem is doing something to him that he cannot quite name, and he does not want to put it down. So the family is, at this hour, doing the 4 things that a family does at this hour in a country house drawing room in 1914. Reading, sewing, thinking, more reading, the Tennyson, the Forster, the Boswell, the Petit Point, the young officer's mind on his battalion. The room is utterly quiet. The clock on the mantel is ticking. The candles are burning down. Outside, the night air is now cool through the open French windows, and Lady Ashcombe has just asked Sir Edward, gently, whether he might close them. Edmund, nearer to them, gets up first and closes the windows and pulls the curtains across them. The room is enclosed now. The night is shut out. This is the hour which I always think the country house drawing room reaches its highest expression. The hour when the room is full of people who love each other, doing different things, in their different islands of attention, in the same warm, quiet space. There is no single activity holding the room together. There is no entertainment that the whole household must focus on. There is no music being played. There is no conversation in progress. There is just the room and the people in it, and the particular way that a family which has been together all evening settles, finally, into a kind of mutual unforced peace. Lavinia, who has reached the death of Mrs. Wilcox in the novel, closes the book gently and puts it on the table beside her chair. She sits for a moment, looking into the unlit fireplace with an expression that her mother, glancing across at her, recognizes but does not interrupt. Lady Ashcombe does not say anything. Daughters need to be left, sometimes, to whatever they are thinking. Lavinia, after a moment, takes a breath and says quietly that she would like to go and sit on the terrace for a few minutes before she goes up. She rises, takes her wrap from the back of the chair, and goes to the French windows. Edmund, who is nearest, opens them for her. She steps out onto the terrace. The cool air comes in through the open windows briefly, and then Edmund closes them again and pulls the curtains across. She is on the terrace for perhaps 10 minutes. The terrace runs the length of the drawing room, and the library, paved in flagstones, with stone urns at each end, planted with white roses that are showing, under the moon, as bright shapes against the dark walls. The lawn rolls down beyond the terrace into the now invisible blackness of the park. The stars are clear. The river, far off, makes its steady sound. There is no other noise. The night is utterly still. Lavinia stands at the balustrade with her hand on the cool stone, looking down the lawn. She is not thinking anything she could put into words. She is, in some way, simply being on the terrace at the end of this particular long, perfect summer day, with the stars over her and the house warm behind her and her family, all of them she loves, in the room behind her glowing through the curtains. The country house terrace at midnight in late July of the last summer. She does not know it is the last summer. None of them do. She is just there. After 10 minutes she comes back in. Edmund, who has been watching her through the gap in the curtains, opens the windows for her. She thanks him. She looks at the others. She says with a smile that the night is very beautiful and they should none of them stay up too late, or they will be tired tomorrow. Lady Ashcombe agrees. The hour is now nearly midnight. The family has had enough of the evening. It is time for bed. The going to bed at Ashcombe Park is a more relaxed affair than it would have been in a Regency or early Victorian household, because by 1914 the household is electrified, and the elaborate procession of chamber sticks up a dark staircase, which had been the bedtime ritual of every English country house from time immemorial until the late 19th century, has been replaced by something more straightforward. The lamps in the corridors and on the staircase are switched on with the brass switches at the foot of the stairs. The light is steady. The way to the bedrooms is plain. The chamber stick, while still kept on the hall table for emergencies and for the candle that everyone likes to have by the bedside at night, has lost its older central function as the only means of getting upstairs in the dark. But certain rituals are unchanged. The family rises together. They say their good nights to each other in the drawing room. Sir Edward kisses his wife on the forehead, kisses Lavinia on the top of her head, claps Edmund and Hugh on the shoulder briefly as they pass. They cross the hall together, switch on the staircase lights, and ascend the staircase as a group, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet, their conversation reduced to murmurs. They pause at the half-landing under the portrait of the second baronet. They continue to the first floor. There they separate. Sir Edward and Lady Ashcombe go to their own rooms, which are connected by a shared dressing room. Edmund goes to his bedroom at the end of the corridor. Hugh goes to his on the other side. Lavinia goes to hers, near her parents. Beatrice, on the floor above, has been asleep for 2 hours. Each of the family will now be attended by their personal servant in a sequence that has been honed over many years of the household running on its current pattern. Lady Ashcombe, in her bedroom, is met by Miss Howard, who has been waiting in the attendant chair near the window. The bedroom is large, with a 4-poster bed of mahogany dating from the early 19th century, a fitted carpet of deep red, heavy curtains drawn across the windows, a fire in the grate against the slight night chill. The fire was lit by Sarah, the head housemaid, an hour ago. The bed has been turned down. There is a small jug of water on the night table. There is a vase of white roses on the chest of drawers picked from the garden that morning. Miss Howard comes forward, takes Lady Ashcombe's wrap, and begins the long, careful process of undressing her. The dinner gown is unhooked at the back, lifted off, hung on the dressing form. The corset is loosened, unlaced, removed. The petticoats are removed. The underlinen is changed for a fresh nightdress. The hair is taken down, brushed by Miss Howard with 100 slow strokes, and rebraided in a single thick plait for the night. The jewellery is removed and locked into the small safe in the dressing room. The whole process takes perhaps 25 minutes. It is utterly familiar. Lady Ashcombe stands or sits passive while Miss Howard moves around her, the two women silent except for occasional small remarks. Miss Howard places a small lamp by the bedside, lit and turned low. Lady Ashcombe gets into bed. Miss Howard pulls up the bedclothes, smooths them, says good night, and leaves the room. The door closes softly behind her. Sir Edward, in his own bedroom across the dressing room, is being attended by Mr. Pemberton in the parallel manner. The white tie is unknotted. The waistcoat is unbuttoned. The shirt and collar are removed. The dinner trousers are exchanged for a long flannel nightshirt. Sir Edward sits at the dressing table while Pemberton brushes his hair briefly, attends to a small matter of a stray thread on the dinner jacket, lays out the day's clothes for the morning. The dinner clothes are taken away to be brushed, hung to air overnight, returned to the dressing room first thing in the morning. Pemberton sets a small carafe of water on the night table, asks if there is anything else, receives a small good night, and withdraws. Lavinia, in her bedroom, is also attended by Miss Howard, who has come across from Lady Ashcombe's room and will return for her own bedtime later. The maid undresses her, helps her into a nightdress, brushes her hair, says good night. Edmund and Hugh, the boys, attend to their own undressing, valets being provided only for senior gentlemen and not for unmarried sons of the house. They each have a footman, William and Thomas, who have laid out their clothes earlier in the evening, but the actual dressing and undressing they do for themselves. By midnight, all 5 members of the family are in their rooms, in their nightclothes, in bed or on the verge of it. Edmund sits up in bed for a few minutes longer than the others. He has, on the chest of drawers, a small framed photograph of Hermione that he has brought down with him from London. He looks at it for a moment before he turns out the bedside lamp. He then lies on his back in the dark, with the window open to the soft summer air, and listens to the small sounds of the house settling for the night. Somewhere a door closes. Somewhere else a clock chimes 1:45. Outside, a tawny owl in the garden calls once. He does not sleep yet. He is thinking, again, about the regiment, about Rowley, about whether his father had been right about the situation in Europe, about whether the wedding will come off, about a great many small things that, taken together, are simply the contents of his mind on this evening, in this house, at this moment of his life. He does not know, lying there, that within 4 weeks he will have crossed to France with his battalion, that within 3 months he will have been wounded for the first time at the First Battle of Ypres, that across the next 4 years he will be wounded twice more and decorated 3 times and will see almost every officer of his original company killed before him. He knows none of this. He is simply lying in bed in his old bedroom in his parents' house on a warm summer night, listening to an owl, falling slowly towards sleep. In each of the other bedrooms, similar small private ends to the day are taking place. Lady Ashcombe, who has said her prayers as she always does, has put out her bedside lamp and is composing herself for sleep. Sir Edward, who reads in bed for 10 minutes most nights, is now reading the Boswell that he had brought up from the drawing-room. Lavinia, who is the lightest sleeper of the family, is sitting up in bed with her novel for a final 10 minutes. Hugh, who is the heaviest sleeper of all of them, is already asleep, with his book on the floor beside him, where it had fallen when his hand relaxed. Below them, the household is closing for the night. The drawing-room is being put to rights by Sarah and Annie, the 2 senior housemaids, who have come up after the family went to bed. They straighten the cushions, plump the chairs, take away the empty coffee cups, snuff the candles that have not yet burned out, turn off the electric lamps with the small brass switches near the doors, draw the curtains more fully, and finally close the doors behind them. The drawing-room sits dark, smelling faintly of beeswax and coffee, with the small red glow of the embers in the grate. In the dining-room, William and Thomas have cleared the table and are now in the butler's pantry under Mr. Renshaw's supervision, washing the silver. The silver of an Edwardian household is not put through the regular kitchen washing up. It is too valuable and too delicate. It is washed by the footman and the butler in the butler's pantry in a special basin with warm water and a soft cloth, and is dried with a separate fine linen towel and put back in the silver safe. Mr. Renshaw watches them work. He is particular about the silver. In the kitchen, the last of the evening's clean-up is being completed. Maud, the scullery maid, who has been at the great copper pans for 2 hours, finishes with the last of them, scrubs out the stone sink with sand, wipes the draining board, and is done. She is 14 years old. She has been on her feet since 5:30 this morning. She is exhausted. She climbs the back stairs to the small bedroom at the top of the service wing, which she shares with Ellen, the kitchen maid, and undresses by candlelight. The female servants do not have electric light in their rooms. The electrification of the house, while extensive, did not reach into the servants' attic. They go to bed by candle, the way servants always have, even though their employers have new electric switches by their bedside. Maud is in bed by 1:20. She will rise at 5:30. In the housekeeper's room, Mrs. Burgess locks her desk for the night, closes her account book, says her own private prayers, and goes through to her bedroom in the service wing. She is in bed by 1:00. She will rise at 6:30. In the butler's pantry, Mr. Renshaw, having seen the silver safely put away, makes his final round of the house. He walks the ground floor checking each room, the drawing-room, the library, the dining-room, the morning-room, the smoking-room, the hall. He checks that the front door is bolted, and the chains are on, and that the back door is locked, and that the door to the terrace is bolted. He turns out the lights as he goes. He returns to the butler's pantry, and with the small electric switch in the pantry, he turns out the last of the lights on the ground floor. He climbs to his small bedroom near the pantry, undresses, says his prayers, and goes to bed. He is in bed by 1:10 past. The house is now dark, top to bottom, except for the small bedside lamps still burning in the family rooms, which will go out one by one in the next quarter of an hour. Outside, the night is utterly still. The lawn rolls away into invisible blackness. The river, beyond the lawn, is a soft, small sound. The stars are clear. From the woods on the far side of the river, the tawny owl calls again. By 1:15, the last lamp has gone out. The family is asleep. The household is asleep. The whole great machinery of Ashcombe Park, which has been running through the long perfect day and the long perfect evening, is now quiet for a few hours, ready to begin again before dawn, when the first servants will rise to lay the morning fires and bring up the hot water cans for the family's washing. The summer night closes over the house, the garden, the park, the river, the village half a mile away. The whole sleeping world of the Hampshire chalk valley and its old families and its slow-moving life. The night is the same night, in exactly the same shape, that has closed over this same house for every night of every summer for 170 years. Tomorrow morning the household will rise to a Saturday in late July of 1914, with the regimental friends arriving on the afternoon train and the cricket match and the strawberries and the long warm day. The pattern will hold for 10 more days, and then the pattern will break, and the world will change, and this house and this family and this evening will become, in a way they cannot yet imagine, something that happened in a vanished time before the war. I want to spend the last part of this evening, if you are still with me, sitting with what an evening like this means, because we have walked carefully through it, the dinner and the drawing room and the music and the bridge and the going to bed, and the whole point of doing so was to be inside it on its own terms, not on the terms of the catastrophe that was coming. We did that. We stayed inside the evening. The Ashcombes had their dinner and their wedding plans, and their conversation about the cricket, and their bridge and their gramophone carousel and their tender quiet hour at the end. They were happy. They had every right to be. There was in their world that night no tragedy. There was a long, perfect summer, and a comfortable house, and a family that loved each other, and a country that they trusted to look after itself. But we know what they did not know, and I think it is worth, in the last hour of this listening, sitting with what we know and trying to do justice to it. Within 10 days of the evening I have just described, on the 4th of August 1914, Britain declared war on Germany. The declaration came at 11 o'clock at night, London time, after a day of mounting pressure that had begun with the German invasion of Belgium that morning. The cabinet had met all afternoon. The ultimatum to Germany had expired at 11. Sir Edward Grey, the Foreign Secretary, had famously said earlier that evening, looking out of his window at the lamplighters in St. James's Park, that the lamps were going out all over Europe and that they would not see them lit again in their lifetime. He was wrong about the literal lamps, but he was right about the deeper meaning of what he was saying. Something had ended that evening. It would take some time before anyone could see exactly what. Edmund Ashcombe's regiment, the Coldstream Guards, was among the units of the British Expeditionary Force that crossed to France in the second week of August. The whole British Army of 1914, the small professional force that was Britain's contribution to the Continental War, was about 120,000 men. They went over from the south coast ports in successive shipments by night, in conditions of strict secrecy that the Germans took some weeks to penetrate. Edmund's battalion sailed from Southampton on the 13th of August. He saw his first action at the Battle of Mons on the 23rd of August. He was in the great retreat from Mons that followed 2 weeks of forced marches under the August sun, his men sleeping in ditches and eating whatever they could carry, the army falling back across northern France with the German advance pressing close behind them. He was at the Battle of the Marne in September, the great counter-attack that turned the German advance and saved Paris. He was at the First Battle of Ypres in October and November, where the original British expeditionary force was almost destroyed in the desperate defence of the Belgian town that became, for the rest of the war, the symbol of British resistance. He was wounded for the first time at Ypres on the 11th of November, taking a piece of shrapnel in his shoulder that put him in a casualty clearing station for 3 weeks. He recovered. He went back to his battalion. He fought through 1915, through 1916, through 1917, through 1918. He was wounded twice more, the second time at Passchendaele in the autumn of 1917, in a way that could have killed him, but did not. He came home finally, in February of 1919, having served 4.5 years in France and Belgium. He had been awarded the Military Cross twice. He had become a major. He had survived almost every officer of his original company, the entire battalion having been replaced 2 or 3 times over by drafts of new men. He was 31 years old. His face was older than his age. His hair was almost white. He was in many ways a different man from the captain on leave who had eaten dinner at his parents' house on the 24th of July 1914. He married Hermione Standish in May of 1919 in a small ceremony at a chapel near Winchester, rather than the great wedding at St. George's, Hanover Square, that had been planned for September of 1914. They had 2 children. He took over the running of the estate from his father, who died in 1924. He served as a magistrate, like his father before him. He was a moderate, unhappy man for the rest of his life, scarred by what he had seen, never quite able to talk about it to his wife or his children, attending the regimental reunions every autumn at Wellington Barracks, going to the cenotaph on Armistice Day each year, aging slowly, never fully recovering. He died in 1956 at the age of 68. He had never spoken in any sustained way about the 4.5 years he had spent in France. The letters and diaries he had written from the trenches were burned by his widow shortly before her own death in 1968. On his explicit instruction, Hugh Ashcombe, the second son, the literary one, the boy who had played the Elgar transcription on the piano that evening, enlisted in August 1914. He had not waited. He had been to the recruiting office in Winchester within a week of the declaration of war. He had taken a commission in a Hampshire battalion of the new Kitchener's army, the volunteer formations that Lord Kitchener was raising in those first months of the war for the much longer fight that he, almost alone among British generals, had foreseen. Hugh trained for nearly a year. He went to France in the summer of 1915. He fought at the Battle of Loos in September 1915. He fought at the Somme in the summer of 1916. He was killed on the first day of the Battle of the Somme, the 1st of July 1916, somewhere near the village of Fricourt, in the great catastrophic morning attack, in which 19,000 British soldiers died and 40,000 more were wounded. He was 24 years old. He had been an officer for 10 months. His body was never recovered. His name is on the Thiepval Memorial, the great monument to the missing of the Somme, which lists 72,000 British and South African soldiers who have no known grave Lady Ashcombe was told of Hugh's death by telegram on the 5th of July 1916. The telegram was delivered to the front door of Ashcombe Park by a boy from the post office in the village. Sir Edward read it first, in the hall, alone, and then went to find his wife in the morning room, and then took her into the library and closed the door, and they sat together for some time before they went to find Lavinia. She never quite recovered. The pain she had been having in her left side, which had turned out to be nothing in 1914, returned in 1918, and turned out, this time, to be cancer. She died in 1920. She was 57. Sir Edward survived his wife by 4 years. He died in 1924 of heart failure at the age of 65. The estate passed to Edmund. The house went on. The household, much reduced, continued. Lavinia Ashcombe never married. She had become engaged in 1916 to a young man called Charles Granville, the son of a neighbouring family, who had been a friend of Hugh's at Oxford. Charles was killed at Arras in April 1917. After the war, Lavinia worked for some years in London at the Imperial War Graves Commission, helping to compile the records of the unidentified British dead. She lived with her sister-in-law and her brother and their children at Ashcombe Park from the late 1920s onward. She wrote, eventually, 2 books on the family's history. She was, by her late middle age, the unofficial historian of the Ashcombes. She died in 1968 at 73, having lived through both world wars and the long aftermath. A quiet figure who had once stood on a terrace in Hampshire on a summer night before any of the disaster, and had felt the night was beautiful and had been right, and who carried that night in her with her for 54 more years. Beatrice, the youngest, the 12-year-old in the schoolroom upstairs that summer evening, lived the longest of the family. She went to a girls' school in 1916. She read history at Lady Margaret Hall, Oxford, in the early 1920s. She married a Cambridge don in 1928. She raised 3 children, lost one of them in the Second World War, and saw the rest of the century through. She died in 1985 at the age of 83. She had, near the end of her life, written a short memoir of her childhood at Ashcombe Park, a small book published privately by her family, in which she had tried to capture for her grandchildren what the country house life of her early years had been like. The book was not particularly remarkable by the standards of Edwardian memoirs. It was full of the standard motifs: the long summer afternoons, the picnics by the river, the cricket on the village green, the smell of the kitchen garden, the warmth of the kitchen on baking day, the feeling of being a child in a great old house with all of its inhabitants, family and servants alike, knowing her by name. But there was one passage in the book that I think gives a glimpse of what we have been trying to do tonight. Beatrice had written, in the chapter on the summer of 1914, that she remembered with absolute clarity a single Friday night that July, when her brothers had been at home and the family had dined together while she was kept upstairs with her supper. She had heard them, she said, through the open windows of the schoolroom. She had heard the gramophone playing Caruso. She had heard her brother Hugh playing the piano. She had heard her sister's laugh and her mother's laugh. She had stood at the window of the schoolroom in her nightdress, looking out at the lawn in the long Hampshire dusk, and she had thought, she said, with the strange certainty that small children sometimes have, that this was the happiest evening of her childhood, and that she would remember it always. She had lived 71 more years. She had lived through the deaths of her brother Hugh, and her mother and her father, through the Second World War and the loss of her own son, through the slow disappearance of the country house life she had been born into. through every small and large change of the 20th century. And the evening she remembered most clearly, of all the evenings of her life, was that one Friday in July 1914, when she had been 12, and her family had been together below her, and the gramophone had been playing Caruso, and the long, perfect summer had been at its very height. She had been right that night to think she would remember it always. She had been right about its happiness. She had been right about almost everything except the future, which a child of 12 has no obligation to predict, and which we should not blame her for not seeing. The household, after the war, was different. Within 5 years of the armistice, the staff had been reduced from 23 to 12, within 10 to 9. By 1939, when the Second World War began, there were 6 indoor staff at Ashcombe Park, plus a small outdoor team. By 1955, there were 3. By 1970, there were none, the house being run by Edmund's widow with help from a daily woman from the village. The country house economy that had supported the establishment of 1914, with its 23 staff and its self-sufficient little kingdom of farms and gardens and workshops and stables, simply could not be maintained in the post-war world. The wages had risen, the taxes had risen. Domestic service was no longer the work that young women from the villages would take if anything else was available. And after the war, an increasing range of other things was available. The factories had taken many young women during the war and had given them, for the first time in their lives, money in their own pockets. They did not go back into service the way they had been expected to. The whole supply chain of country house labour that had operated since the 18th century was disrupted and would never quite re-establish itself. This was happening across England. The 1,000 great country houses of 1914 were, by 1960, far fewer in number, and the survivors were being run on a quite different model. Many had been demolished. Many had been sold and converted into hotels, into schools, into nursing homes, into county council offices. Some had been given to the National Trust, which preserved them as museums but could not bring back the way of life they had been built for. The country house, as a working institution, had effectively ended within 40 years of the summer of 1914. There are still country houses today, of course. There are still families living in them. There are still gardens, still libraries, still drawing rooms with portraits over the mantel and silver candlesticks on the table. But there are not, in any of them, the 23 staff, the kitchen running 15 hours a day, the laundry on Monday and Tuesday, the gardener and the undergardeners and the coachman and the chauffeur and the gamekeeper, the whole interlocking economy of work and place that the country house of 1914 had taken for granted as a fact of nature. The First World War was the most significant single shock, but it was not the only cause. The agricultural depression, the liberal taxation reforms of 1909, the death duties, the rise of cheaper alternatives to country labour, the gradual but steady erosion of the income that had supported the great estates, all of these had been at work for decades before 1914. The war did not destroy a flourishing institution out of nowhere. It accelerated, by perhaps 30 or 40 years, a process that was already well underway. But it did accelerate it, and it did concentrate it in a way that has made August 1914 stand forever after, as the moment when the long Edwardian afternoon ended. The dead came home, mostly slowly. The names of the parish dead were inscribed on the new war memorial in Ashcombe St Mary, which was put up in 1920, with a service of dedication conducted by the new vicar before a congregation that included Sir Edward, and Lady Ashcombe, and Edmund, and Lavinia, but not Hugh, and not the 4 other young men of the village, whose names were also on the stone. The memorial was a stone cross on a stepped base, with the names of the 17 men of the parish who had died, ranged in order of date of death, from a private of the Hampshire regiment killed at Lecato in August 1914, to a corporal of the Royal Engineers killed in the last week of October 1918. 17 names from a parish of about 300 people on the stone for the rest of time. There were similar stones in every village in England. There are still. They are perhaps the single most universal physical legacy of the war. Wherever you go in rural England you find them, sometimes elaborate, more often simple, with the names of the dead of 2 parishes on opposite sides of the same stone. The World War I names usually outnumbering the World War II names by a factor of 3 or 4. They are the small stone witnesses of what the summer of 1914 led into, and they are the reason that the summer of 1914 is remembered so particularly intensely, because the contrast between the warm evening of the 24th of July and the long lists of names on those stones is the contrast between an entire world and the silence that succeeded it. Now I want to come back to the evening itself before we end. When you sit, as I have asked you to sit tonight, inside an evening like the Ashcombe's evening of the 24th of July 1914, and you stay inside it for several hours, and you do not let the catastrophe that is coming dictate what you notice, you start to see something that I think the catastrophe normally obscures. You start to see the evening on its own terms, the summer dusk through the open French windows, the candles on the dining table next to the new electric chandelier, the salmon from the home water, the hock in the decanter, the cricket conversation, the wedding plans, the walk on the terrace at midnight under the stars, the tender hour of reading and sewing in the drawing room with the family doing their separate quiet things in the same warm room, the going to bed, the owl in the woods. This evening, on its own terms, is one of the highest expressions of a particular form of domestic civilization that human beings have achieved. It is not the most exciting evening. It is not, in any conventional historical sense, an evening that mattered. The diplomatic crisis was happening elsewhere. The political world was happening elsewhere. The great events of 1914 were happening elsewhere. This evening is just a family at home in their house on a Friday in July, eating dinner together and playing bridge. But there is something in the texture of it that is worth seeing and worth missing, and worth understanding has been almost entirely lost. The slow rhythm of it, the unhurried meal, the fact that nobody was on a screen and nobody was reachable from outside the room, the way the family did different small things in the same room without needing the room to focus on a single activity, the presence with each other that was forced by the absence of any alternative, the handmade quality of the food, the garden providing the flowers and the strawberries and the salmon, the piano played by a real human being, and the gramophone played without competition for attention, the dark outside the windows when the windows had been closed that the house held back with its modest illumination, the terrace at midnight with the stars overhead and the river audible far down the lawn, the going to bed at 11:30, all of them at once, the household gathering itself into a single shared rhythm of sleep. These are not things we have, in our modern domestic lives, in any consistent way. We do not have most of them. We have replaced them with other things. We have replaced the slow handmade meal with packaged food and microwaves and takeaway. We have replaced the quiet shared room with rooms full of screens, each one demanding its own attention. We have replaced the gramophone, of which there was one in the household, with the audio devices of which each member of the household has at least 3. We have replaced the bedtime ritual of the whole family ascending the staircase together with the staggered drift to bed of people who are checking their phones until 2 in the morning. We have replaced the particular slow sweetness of an evening like the Ashcombs evening with something faster, brighter, busier, more individually entertaining, and in the deepest sense, lonelier. I am not saying that the Ashcombs had a better life. They lived inside a class system that depended on a rigid inequality. Their household ran on the labour of 23 people who were paid very small wages and who were given very little of their own time. The young men of the family were about to be killed in their hundreds of thousands by the failure of a political system that had taken their good lives for granted. The civilization we have built since, with its much wider distribution of comfort and education and possibility, with its medical advances and its longer lives and its democracy and its broadly available leisure, is in almost every measurable respect more humane than the civilization that produced the Ashcombs evening. I do not want to go back to 1914. The world we have built since is, on balance, better than the world they had. But certain particular small things were possible in 1914 that are not possible now, and certain particular small things have been lost that are worth knowing about. The slowness was one of them. The presence was another. The unforced sharing of a single room by a family that was not pulled in 5 directions at once. The making of music by hand. The meal cooked from scratch by people who knew what they were doing. The reading done in the same room as the people one loved. The going to bed when the day had had its proper shape and its proper end. Some of these things are still available to us if we are deliberate about them. We can still cook a meal slowly. We can still sit in the same room as our family without a screen between us. We can still play music or sing. We can still go to bed at the same time. None of this is impossible. It just requires a kind of intentional attention against the constant pull of the modern world, which the Ashcombs had structurally, and we have to choose. It is harder for us. I am going to leave them now. The Ashcombs are asleep. The house is dark. The owl in the woods is calling for the last time. The river is running down through the chalk valley as it has done for 10,000 years. Stars are wheeling slowly overhead. The summer night is at its deepest and most peaceful hour. Within 10 days the world will change. Within 4 months Hugh will be in a Hampshire training camp and Edmund will be in the trenches before Ypres. Within 2 years the family will receive the telegram about Hugh and Lady Ashcombe will begin to die slowly. Within 54 years only Beatrice will remain. But none of that is in the room. The rooms are dark and quiet. The family is asleep. The household is asleep. The whole of southern England is asleep, more or less, in this last week of the long Edwardian afternoon, with the corn ripening in the fields and the cricket being played on the village greens and the hop gardens of Kent at their height, and the people of England largely unaware that anything important is happening anywhere. The papers tomorrow will carry more news from the Balkans, and the news will be slightly worse than the news of today, and slightly worse again the day after, and within a week most people will have begun to take seriously that something serious is coming. But not tonight. Tonight is still the evening of the 24th of July 1914, and it is 2 o'clock in the morning, and the night is utterly still, and the country house is dark, and the family that lives in it is asleep, and the world that they will wake up to tomorrow is, for the last few hours, still the world they have always known. There is a particular kind of comfort, I think, in the company of people who have already been through what is coming. The Ashcombs do not know what is coming. They are sleeping their last unworried sleep. We carry the knowledge of the next 4 years and the next century with us as we sit beside them. In that asymmetry, there is something almost protective in our attention. We cannot do anything for them. We cannot warn them. We cannot prevent the war or the telegrams or the names on the stone. But we can sit with them on the night of the 24th of July 1914, and we can pay attention, and we can give the evening they had its full weight as a thing that happened and mattered and was on its own terms beautiful. The act of attention is itself a kind of small honouring. It does not change anything. It does not need to. If you are still awake, listening, at this hour, I want you to feel yourself a little more deeply into the night that the Ashcombs are now several hours into. The house is dark. The bedroom curtains are drawn. The household is asleep. The night air is soft and cool. The window of Edmund's bedroom has been left open, a small inch, because he likes the air on his face when he sleeps. The window of Lady Ashcomb's bedroom is closed, because she is more sensitive to the night chill. Lavinia's curtains are drawn, but the window is open behind them, and the small breeze occasionally lifts the curtain. Hugh has fallen asleep with his face turned to the wall and his book on the floor. Beatrice has been asleep for 5 hours, the deepest sleep of any of them, the long unbroken sleep of a healthy 12-year-old child. The house is full of the small quiet sounds of sleeping people. The clocks in the various rooms are ticking. The grandfather clock in the hall has just struck 3. Outside, the night is at its deepest hour. The stars are wheeling slowly overhead. There is no moon tonight, the new moon being 4 days away, and the sky is therefore very dark, and the stars are particularly bright. The Milky Way is clear across the southern sky. The constellations are in their late July positions, Cygnus high in the east, Lyra above it, the summer triangle bright and clear. The Hampshire countryside, in 1914, has very little artificial light to compete with the stars. There is a small string of gas lamps in Winchester 4 miles away, and 1 or 2 oil lamps in cottages where someone is up late, and the small steady glow of the new electric lights at 1 or 2 of the larger country houses where the houses are still active. But beyond these, the country is dark in a way that we have largely lost. The dark of 1914 was a darker dark than ours. The stars meant more. Against it, the river runs. It has been running through this valley since the chalk was laid down 100 million years ago, and was lifted up and shaped into the rolling country that southern England has become. The river runs in the same channel it has run in for 10,000 years, since the last ice age. It has been fished by men for at least 4,000 of those years. It has had farms along it for 2,000 years. It has had a settlement on the spot where Ashcombe St. Mary stands for at least 1,000 years. The river does not know that it is 1914. The river does not know about the Ashcombes, or the war, or the long Edwardian afternoon, or the catastrophe that is coming. The river runs. The owl in the woods on the far bank is hunting. It is the same tawny owl that called once during dinner. It has caught a young rabbit just before midnight, taken it back to the hollow tree where it has its summer roost, eaten it slowly, and is now back out hunting again, the second hunt of its night. It will hunt until the sky begins to lighten in the east, which in late July at this latitude will happen at about 3:15. It will then return to its roost and sleep through the day. It is a creature of the night. It does not see the long, perfect summer days that the Ashcombes see. Its summer is the summer of the warm, dark hours, The garden is full of small movements. Hedgehogs are moving through the long grass at the edge of the rose garden. Bats are still abroad, the last few stragglers, hunting moths along the edge of the woods. Field mice are moving through the kitchen garden. The bees in the hives behind the kitchen garden are quiet, all clustered in the hive for the night, their slow rumble inaudible from outside. The roses, with their petals folded slightly more than they had been at the height of the day, are giving off their scent into the dark air, the scent that is at its most intense in the small hours when the temperature is at its lowest, and the still air holds the perfume of the garden in suspension. The village is asleep. The two pubs, the Ashcombe Arms and the Crown, have been closed for hours. The lamps in the cottage windows have been put out one by one. The old men who sit on the bench outside the Crown in the evening have all gone home. The young people who walk in the lanes after dark in summer have gone in. The dog at the rectory has stopped barking at whatever it had been barking at earlier. The vicar is asleep in the rectory. The schoolmistress is asleep in the small house next to the school. The shopkeepers are asleep above their shops. The whole life of Ashcombe St. Mary, 300 souls, is suspended in sleep. In the surrounding countryside, the same silence holds. Across Hampshire, across Wiltshire and Dorset and Sussex, across the south of England, across the whole island more or less, the rural population, which is still in 1914 the larger part of the country's population in geographical distribution, though no longer in absolute numbers, is asleep in its villages and farmhouses and country towns. The trains are not running on the main lines, except for one or two slow night freights. The roads are largely empty. Even London, 4 hours of travel away by motor car or 2 by train, is quieter than it ever is now, at this hour, with the gas lamps burning low in the streets, and the electric trams parked in their depots and only the night cabs and the early market traffic moving through the streets. The whole country is asleep. This is what 1914 nights had that ours do not. A degree of stillness, of darkness, of low ambient noise that we have almost entirely lost. Our nights are louder, brighter, busier. There are aeroplanes overhead. There is traffic on roads. There is the steady glow of cities visible miles away. There is the constant hum of the modern world that does not quite stop. The night of 1914 was a deeper night. The hours between 2 and 4 in the morning were the hours of a more profound silence than any silence available to most of us today. If you are listening to this in bed, in the comfortable warmth of your own dark room, I want you to know that the dark you are in, while not as dark as the Hampshire dark of July 1914, is dark enough. Your eyes are closing, your breathing is slowing, your body is heavy. The stars over the Ashcombe's lawn are wheeling slowly overhead, and the river is running, and the owl is hunting, and the family is sleeping, and the household village country is sleeping, and you, wherever you are joining them. Letting the day fall away, letting the slight residual tension in your shoulders go, letting the small worries that follow you into bed fall slowly out of mind. Letting yourself be held by the warm dark and the small remembered presence of a family in a country house 112 summers ago, who slept on this exact night, in beds in their old rooms in their old house, and who were, on this night, perfectly content. The night will deepen for 2 more hours until about 4:30, when the eastern sky will begin to pale. The first birds will begin to sing at about 4:45, the blackbirds first, then the song thrushes, then the smaller birds, the dawn chorus that in late July reaches its full intensity by 5:15. By 6, The kitchen at Ashcombe Park will be stirring again. Mrs. Caverley and the kitchen maids and Maud, the scullery maid, back at the range, the first kettles back on the boil, the household preparing to begin its Saturday. The pattern will resume. The cricket match will be played in the afternoon. The regimental friends will arrive on the 3:30 train. The strawberries will be picked. The day will turn into evening. Another evening, another long dusk, another pattern of family in their separate small occupations in the warm drawing room. The pattern will hold for 10 more days, and then it will break, and the world will change. But the change is not yet. Tonight is still tonight. The family is still asleep. The river is still running. The owl is still hunting. The summer is still in its full perfect height. Sleep with them. Sleep into them. Sleep through them. Let yourself rest in the warm dark of the night that they were inside on the 24th of July 1914, the last unworried night of their old life, the night that the youngest of them remembered for 71 more years as the happiest evening of her childhood. Sleep well. Sleep deeply. The night holds the house, and the house holds the family, and the family holds, in some small honoured way, the listener who has stayed with them through these last several hours. I want to thank you for staying with me through this evening. It is, I think, an evening worth knowing about, in detail on its own terms, as a thing that happened, as a real Friday night in a real house in a real summer that real people lived through. The Ashcombes are imagined, but houses and families like the Ashcombes were real, in their thousands, across the south of England that summer. The evening I have described has, in its general shape, happened in countless versions in countless houses on countless evenings in late July of 1914. It has happened. It is part of the texture of human life that has been. It is worth being known, the dramatic irony of the evening, which we have held just outside the windows for these last several hours, is by now fully present in your mind. You know what is coming. The Ashcombes do not. That asymmetry is the source of the particular weight of this kind of remembering. We owe it to them, perhaps, to remember the evening they had on its own terms, with the same attention they would have given it themselves, with the same gentle pleasure in the small details, before we let the catastrophe come in. It has been in our minds throughout the evening. We have managed, mostly, to leave it just outside. The lamps go out. The owl calls. The river runs. The family sleeps. The summer night holds the great old house and the lawn and the garden and the village and the chalk valley and the whole sleeping country in its still dark hand. By morning the world will still be there. By August the world will be different. By November the first telegrams will be arriving in the village. By 1918 the names will be on the stone. But that is then. This is now. This is the evening of the 24th of July 1914. The Ashcombes are asleep. The house is dark. The night is at its deepest. Sleep well. Wherever you are listening from, sleep well in the remembered company of a family who slept well too, on this exact night, all those summers ago, in a house that no longer functions as it did, in a country that no longer exists in the form it had, at the end of an afternoon that was longer than they knew. Good night to them. Good night to you. Sleep well.